Good morning. Welcome to our Committee of the Whole for September. I'm going to go ahead and get us started this morning. Mr. Meek should be joining us later. He has had a death in his family, so let us remember him in our thoughts and our prayers today, and make us go home and hug and appreciate those that our loved ones among us. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and the first item on our agenda is the consent calendar.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion to approve and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. The next item is the administration portion. If you'll notice, we're changing up a little bit from our normal structure today, so we're going to go with the administration portion, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Wales.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. The first item on our agenda for administration is the appearance of visitors. We have 3 visitors that have signed up to speak today. Welcome for those that are speaking, and thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us today. So we'll have 3 minutes for each one of you to speak. When I call you up, you'll come right over here. We have a light system, so our secretary will time you for the 3 minutes. So it'll go from green to yellow to red. We do have a board policy that says abusive language or personal attacks aimed at students or staff members will not be allowed. Your speakers are expected to behave in an orderly and respectful manner. The board won't engage in discussion based on the comments made, but the superintendent will designate a member of the staff to respond to each person that signs up to speak and speaks this morning. So the first person we have to speak is Abigail Hendricks.
Thank you all. It's so nice to meet you all. Our goal is to keep healthy kids in school. We know that Greenville County School District is using contact tracing to force healthy kids to stay home. I don't believe Greenville County School District is required to follow the contact tracing in combination with isolation and quarantine, a strategy that is recommended by DHEC. DHEC COVID guidance for school clearly states that localities, such as Greenville County School District, can implement more or fewer preventative strategies. We know these are recommendations and not enforceable rules because they include things like vaccination, mask use, physical distancing, screen testing, which are not requirements. I've heard multiple times that the board is forced to follow the recommendations as rules. I've asked you to point me to specific law or statutes. Chapter 1, Title 44, -1, subsections 140, 10, 12, and 80. What about these statutes makes you feel compelled to enforce guidelines? They are recommendations, not rules. Has DHEC ordered you to impose any of their recommendations provided are other enforceable rules? If so, what are those? How do you justify forcing healthy kids to stay home when the governor just signed the 704 bill into law requiring 5 days a week in-person instruction? We would ask that students shall not be required to quarantine until after they have a positive COVID test. Quarantine time shall end with a negative COVID-19 test or 10 days from the date of the positive test, which I also believe is the CDC's recommendation. I have others that I would like to ask for you guys to look at, but those are the main ones. If you could please answer the questions that I've had. There are 3 main points. Has DHEC ordered you to impose any recommendations or rules? And then please point to the subsections in Chapter 1, Title 44-1, 140, 10, 12, and 80, and explain to me why you have to enforce things that are not enforceable. Also on DHEC's site, there's layered prevention strategies to reduce transmission. On here, it says that localities have the ability to choose more or fewer. You do have the power. You are not forced. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hendricks. Next, we have Angela Lear.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. As a parent of 3 children, one who graduated in 2020, the other in 2021, and a current sophomore, I can tell you firsthand that this is our 3rd year of interrupted education for our students. Today I want to speak about the current guidelines for COVID quarantine and contact tracing, and I can tell you that they are unsustainable. Some of the questions I have are as follows. Where is the data that the school district is using to support the quarantine procedures? How many quarantine students are actually contracting COVID? How many of the confirmed cases are severe, leading to hospitalization? How many are asymptomatic? How many are vaccinated? How many are unvaccinated? Neither the school board nor the DPAC has been able to provide parents with data supporting the current procedures. Disrupted education, virtual schooling, and the mental stress of quarantining is harmful to our children. An unvaccinated and vaccinated student exposed to a student with COVID, the unvaccinated student will be sent home, and the vaccinated student stays in the classroom. We know all vaccinated or unvaccinated students can get COVID and can spread it. So it doesn't make sense. Isn't the whole point of quarantine to stop the spread? It has been proven that vaccinated individuals, students, adults, can get COVID and spread it. Why are we allowing COVID-exposed, vaccinated students to return to the classroom? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of stopping the spread? It doesn't make any sense, and we should all be questioning this procedure. And I also want to share personally, 13 months ago I had COVID. 2 weeks ago I had my antibodies checked, and I still have them. 13 months. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Ms. Laird. Ben Howell.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm a local health insurance agent. I have a degree in education from Chapel Hill. I've put 3 children through the school district. I'm a volunteer at Virginia Achievement. And so I know a little bit about what goes on in the schools. I have a great deal of respect for teachers and for what y'all do. I know it's an enormous job, and I appreciate that. Every single day I listen and I read reports of parents whose children are suffering because of the quarantine rules. And I would ask that you all reconsider the quarantine of healthy children. You have to look at the whole child. You have to consider the loss of learning, the stress that it puts on the family and the child. I've put together a lot of research, data. 3 minutes certainly isn't time to go through all of that. This is about 7 pages of references from the Economic Policy Institute. And basically the gist of it is lessons that we've learned from last year. The children that are disadvantaged, that are from home lives that don't have necessarily help or internet, suffer the most. How many students are in the school district? 60,000? How many of those 60,000 are being harmed, whose education and whose future will never be made up by constantly creating chaos in the family and in their life? Okay? Economic Policy Institute, right here. A lot of the metrics that you're looking at, hospital admissions, that data is in question. There was a study just the other day from the Atlantic, published in the Atlantic. Dr. Doran, infectious disease physician at Tufts Medical Center in Boston, studied 50,000. Does that mean I stop?
It does. It does. That's your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Thank you guys for coming to speak. We're going to move on to our next item on the agenda. Item 2.02 is the naming of Carolina High School Gymnasium. We have a recommended motion from the administration to approve the naming of the gymnasium at Carolina High School for Betty Moore. Do I have a maker of the motion?
I'd like to move to,
Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
okay. Didn't hear it.
I would like to say that Betty Moore was my high school basketball coach and teacher. And she was great back in 1980 when I graduated. And it would be a great honor for her to have her name up there on the gymnasium at Carolina High School. The recommended motion is to approve the naming of the gymnasium at Carolina High School for Betty Moore.
All right, so I have a maker of the motion, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell, seconded by Ms. Leventis Wells. Is there any other discussion or any other comments on the motion?
As well as if I might.
Sure, Dr.
In addition to the substantial documentation that you have in your board docs, I've had the privilege over a number of years of working with coaches, athletic directors, teachers in other districts. And I can tell you from that perspective, I had long heard Betty Moore's name and influence before I came to Greenville County 17 years ago. So she's influenced not only Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell and other individual students and athletes, but a succession of individuals who chose the same profession that she chose. So we certainly are very supportive of this recommendation. Pleased to bring it to you.
Ms. Leventis Wells.
Coached against.
No other discussion. All in favor of the motion to approve the naming of the gymnasium at Carolina High School for Betty Moore, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much. Item 2.03, the naming of Greer High School Multipurpose Gymnasium. Similarly, we have a recommended motion from the administration to approve the naming of the multipurpose gymnasium at Greer High School for Travis Perry. Do I have a maker of the motion?
I'd like to make the motion, please, ma'am.
I'll second the motion.
Mr. Southern put the motion on the floor, seconded by Mr. Sailors. Is there any commentary or discussion on this item from Dr. Royster, or Dr. Royster, you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Ms. Wells. If I might, there's again, as similar to Coach Moore's substantial documentation from the Greer community and Greer High School. And I think without question, he had a tremendous impact on Greer and lived Greer and Greer athletics. What might not be quite as apparent from those recommendations and those letters of support is the impact, again, that Coach Perry had statewide and on his profession. He was well recognized as a leader among athletic directors in the state and among coaches in the state, very well respected by people throughout the state, throughout the region in his profession. And he had a profound and positive impact on that profession well outside the boundaries of Greenville County and outside the Greer area. So it is certainly a great privilege to be able to present this on behalf of the Greer community and recognizing Coach Perry's significant achievements.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Mr. Southern, do you have any commentary?
I'd just like to say that Mr. Perry was simply a great coach, great ruler of students, and he is certainly deserving of this award and this naming of the facility for him. He was really truly a student person, and I really appreciate him being ordered in this way.
Anyone else Hearing no other commentary, the motion on the floor is to approve the naming of the multipurpose gymnasium at Greer High School for Travis Perry. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. And that is the end of this section of the Committee of the Whole, and I'll turn it back over to Ms. Bush.
Wales, one of the very few times I see you did a great job, and we are ahead of schedule. So the pressure is on. This is Goodwin Caldwell.
That's because I wasn't asking
Turn it over to
questions.
you for building and grounds.
I'll get used to it.
Well, I think building and grounds has a little more in it. Okay, for building and grounds section, we have a 3.01, Riverside Middle School lease agreement renewal with the city of Greer. Dr. Royster, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell. This is simply a renewal of an ongoing lease agreement we have with the city of Greer to utilize softball, baseball, and football fields at Riverside Middle School, to extend that for another 5 years. If there is any question about specifics, Colonel Carlin, I'm sure, can speak to those, but it is, I don't see there are any changes in this from previous renewals with the city of Greer.
No, sir, no changes.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the lease agreement renewal with the city of Greer.
There's been a recommended motion from Mr. Sellers. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sutter. The motion to approve the lease agreement renewal with the city of Greer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed is nay. The motion is passed.
Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell, just real quick before you leave that, I had one quick question, if I might.
Okay. Ms. Wells?
And I'm in favor of approving the motion, but I guess it's just a question related to these agreements. Knowing that our district staff handles the maintenance on fields, is there a cost share? I didn't see anything in the lease agreement. Is there any kind of cost share, or do we just handle?
Not traditionally, there hasn't been a cost share. We have a good working relationship where if we need their assistance with something, we can get that. It doesn't likely create any additional cost for the additional use. If it would be fairly insignificant, because we're going to have to maintain them anyway.
I know, like, the city of Greenville still helps some with playgrounds with mulch and safety.
They do on occasion, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms.
Okay. Number 3.02, renewable water resources, right-of-way easement at Sue Cleveland Elementary School and Woodmont Middle School. Dr. Royster.
Yeah, this is both a permanent right-of-way and a temporary construction easement that crosses our property. This is something new, and it does relate to the expansion of sewer services to an adjacent Highway 25 business park, which does not have any negative impact on us, but I'll let Colonel Carlin speak to the details, because it's a little more detailed than just an ordinary right-of-way easement.
That's correct. Just for your information, and this came up in discussion recently with the board, the existing infrastructure on our campus is owned and operated by Renewal. We asked them specifically to make us aware if they believe the current infrastructure would handle the anticipated load from the business park. We have a letter from them stating that absolutely it will. They do have plans in the future to upgrade infrastructure in the area that would include upgrading our infrastructure on the campus. But at this time, there's no concern that new introduction of sewer services is going to compromise anything on our campus.
That's it. Okay, the recommended motion from the administration is to approve a permanent sanitary sewer right-of-way and temporary construction easement as requested by Renewal at Sue Cleveland Elementary School and Woodmont Middle School. Is there any discussion?
I'd like to just make the motion if you,
Okay.
yeah, so I move to approve a permanent sanitary sewer right-of-way and temporary construction easement as requested by Renewal at Sue Cleveland Elementary School and Woodmont Middle School.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and there's been a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The motion is approved. Okay. 3.03, the Duke Energy Carolinas LLC right-of-way easement at Northwood Middle School. Dr. Royster.
This easement is presented as both an overhead and an underground easement for utility upgrade. Colonel Carlin can speak to the details.
Yes, so there's a 15-foot section of infrastructure that they plan to upgrade. It's in the southwest corner of the campus next to a wooded area and will have no impact on our campus operations.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the utility easement as requested by Duke Energy Carolinas LLC at Northwood Middle School.
Then, the motion has been made and properly second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Okay, 3.04, Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance Permanent and Gradual Easement and Right-of-Way at Travelers Rest High School. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin-Cowell. This easement and right-of-way is a little bit unusual. I won't say there's never been one. To my recollection, we've not done one certainly in recent years. This will be a right-of-way and an easement with a nonprofit, which will be Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance. And because it is a little bit unique in that respect, we have also backstopped this with some assurances from the City of Travelers Rest, because we don't traditionally enter into agreements with nonprofits. Some nonprofits are extremely stable and are around for quite a few years, and this may very well be one that is. Others do not have as long a life and do not sometimes enjoy as great a stability. So Mr. Webb may want to speak a little bit to the specifics of how we have sort of insured against any concern regarding the viability long-term of the nonprofit. Mr. Webb?
Sure. So, and this easement is a little different in the sense that we have put language in there that the easement can only be assigned and inured to the benefit of the City of Travelers Rest. So really there are three possible outcomes here. One, nonprofit does well, keeps it for another number of years. I think the intent is for the nonprofit to transfer it, no matter how well they're doing, to the City of Travelers Rest at some point. The second one is that nonprofit struggles, perhaps, and assigns it over to the City of Travelers Rest. Or the third one is that the nonprofit doesn't do as well, and it comes back to us because they no longer keep up with the easement. So regardless, it's either stays with the nonprofit, City of Travelers Rest, or comes back to us. So it protects our interest in the area.
Okay, it's now motion. Yes.
I move to approve the Upstate Greenways and Trail Alliance a permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way at Travelers Rest High School.
There a second?
I second.
Motion has been made and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, discussion.
Yes, please. This nonprofit, UGATA, is really, I think it's really building off of what the Swamp Rabbit Trail is doing that goes right through Travelers Rest. And it comes by the high school, goes behind it, and makes it easy accessibility to the YMCA down around where it's really hard to get to the Y from the road because it's such a busy road. If you know where Sunrift is, you would turn left at that light, and you would go down, and those kids have to walk on a busy road. So it alleviates that danger and brings you behind where the trail is absolutely going to be gorgeous. The views are phenomenal, and our students will be exercising and breathing fresh air and enjoying nature, and we need that for our children. So I'd like to commend the Colonel for working, and Doug and the district for working with this nonprofit and understanding the importance of nature and health and all that is involved. And Debbie, good for you and TR. That's going to be a plus, I think. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Bush?
Yes, I too want to commend all the people that worked together on this project. It's been, I guess, it's been a very long time that everybody has worked together to get it to this stage, to be able to bring it to the board. And going back and forth with the concerns of the city, the concerns of the school district, the concerns of the principal. And so everyone's very excited about the connection to the Swamp Rabbit Trail. There is also a mid-sized subdivision that this leads to, and that road is so busy, so it terrifies me every time, because I travel it a lot, and every time you come around those curves going into Travelers Rest, there's a sidewalk on one side of the road, but you know, it's very busy in the morning with kids going from that subdivision, and there's also another subdivision with several hundred homes that's slated to go in out there around the Y. So this is a great asset for the community, for Travelers Rest. Was this not something, I know that doing the nonprofit, but we also did something like this with Lakeview Middle School, where we allowed access across.
Yes, and I think the agreement there, Ms. Bush, if I recall correctly, was actually with County Rec. I think there were some other participants in it, but I believe the formal agreement was with County Rec, which is now part of county government, not a separate commission. I think that occurred back maybe when they were a separate county commission.
And I know that's been a wonderful asset to that community, being able to have it like TR, like all of our schools, they're built on busy roads because they are busy because of the children in the schools in the community. So,
and like you mentioned, Lakeview, and like Lakeview, we made some requirements there to screen and fence the trail from the school property. Because you're going to have outside traffic on that trail during regular school hours.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Ms. Wells?
Councilman Caldwell, so our property, this exhibit we have doesn't show our entire property parcel, right?
Well,
Property line doesn't stop at the blue line, or does it?
Well, let me say this. And let's see if I can describe this well. Our property line, if you look at, well, let's use as a point of reference on the big sheet that we attached. The double dashed yellow line that runs from north to south on the page.
Yep.
Where that intersects the red line, which is indicated to show approximately the location of the trail, that white line below it is our property line.
Right.
When you get to the end of the cul-de-sac, Solis Court, the property line turns southeast. So you can see where the trail, so we own those two parcels, is what I'm trying to explain. The one that ends with 400 and the one that ends with 100.
Okay. So we own those two. So we're not showing, but we also own all the way, if you're looking at this same exhibit, all the way to the left. Some of our parcels not showing. So we're
That
not
is correct.
showing
If
the
you
entire
look
parcel.
if you look at the extreme edge of the page in the southwest corner, you can see the edge of our property line there.
Ms. Wells?
Right, you can't see it.
I'm going to extend for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I just want some clarification. So all that property is ours. Are we currently, all that's wooded, there's a stream running through it, we're not currently using that for any outdoor activities, classroom, educational type stuff?
The only area that I know of that's used back there is for the cross-country team, and they go back and run in that area.
Okay, so we've screened off from a security standpoint along the kind of campus proper, if you will. But once you get to the back, there's interaction and access between the trail and our fields.
I think I see where you're going. We have a continuous fence between what we're going to put in here, a retaining wall, and other fences that surround athletic fields all the way around the campus.
Okay, that's what's hard to see.
It will be separated by a fence the whole way.
Okay.
You can really see that water.
Right. That's right. Okay, so we do have some fencing in between.
Yes, ma'am, that's
Okay.
correct.
So they mentioned they're gonna have a 30-foot easement, and that's potentially pedestrian bikeways. Is it gonna be a paved surface, or is it gonna be, what is the?
They haven't given the specifics, but I think the intent is to do it something like you see along the Swamp Rabbit.
Okay, and in terms of maintenance and upkeep,
That would be theirs or eventually the city's.
okay, and do we have any idea cost-wise? I mean, to your point, Dr. Royster, about, they've taken on the responsibility, and I read the letter from Travelers Rest, but, what sort of infrastructure costs are there to kind of keep this, you gotta keep trash up, you gotta keep pavement?
Right. I'm not sure of the
Tracking and-
specifics. Rumor has told me that they're raising a lot of money to get this done. As a matter of fact, all the other parcels that this will connect to, going back to the Y, they've already secured the easements for it. I believe ours was the remaining one.
I guess another way to look at that, they're going to be accepting a level of maintenance responsibility we don't currently incur. Because it's pretty well natural, most of the area they're going through. Now, if you look up there where it crosses, you can see that drive. That's a drive access to student parking lot. They routinely use it every day. They also use it as access for athletic events. See where it says painted bike crossing? So we maintain that entrance area, but you can see even that has got vegetation up pretty close to the roadway. So they're going to be undertaking to maintain at a much different level than what we maintain. Because it basically is left in a natural state.
And is that something that they currently do now? Do they have a system of trails they maintain, or do they build it and then, again, their intent to turn it over to the city to maintain?
It's my understanding that the intent is eventually for the city to maintain it. From my dealings with Mr. Nathan Galbraith, he's a real estate attorney up in Travelers Rest that's been kind of facilitating this. The city's reluctant to take these projects on initially, but their intent is to turn it over to the city and then the city maintain it.
Okay. And then this exhibit's gonna be replaced with a true easement once they have it built, I guess.
And
is
the
what I saw in
actual trail
lease
goes into place, yes, ma'am.
agreement. And will that come back to the board, or will you guys just replace?
We can send it back to you for information, but your action today would or subsequently to this action, the action at the board meeting would cover the approval to do so.
Unless they change the alignment or something.
Unless they were to, in some way, alter what's been put in writing, then we would need to bring that back to you, have it amended.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Goodman-Call.
Are there any other questions? Chair, maker of the motion. Recommended motion from the administration is to approve the Upstate Greenways and Trails Alliance permanent and perpetual easement and right-of-way at Travelers Rest High School. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. Motion passed. Item 3.05, Facilities Project Report. Dr. Royster or Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell. You have the report in front of you. I don't think there's anything of particular note to draw your attention to, but certainly Colonel Carlin can respond to any question that you might have.
Mr. Sutter?
Mr. Carlin,
Yes, sir.
in the weight rooms, are we adding free weights or machines?
The projects include constructing the actual buildings. I believe it is going to be up to the schools to supply the weight equipment itself.
So in these facilities, we're trying to improve the space or create additional space?
That is correct.
In every case, Mr. South, it would be additional space.
Okay, so Dr. Royster, all we're doing then is increasing the space.
Yes, sir. We're bringing them all to a minimum square footage standard that exceeds their current weight room capacity, I believe in every location except one, and it's an additional facility for them. And at this point, we do not have budgeted any weight equipment. They can apply, because it would qualify as capital equipment, they can apply for the matching funds if they wish to do so to help them with adding equipment.
So if they wish equipment, that would have to come out of their budget.
Yes, sir. Their budget or fundraising, and again, if they want to seek matching funds for fundraising, they can do so through the capital matching fund, which is available for anything that's considered capital.
Machines that they have, there's no guidelines on those machines.
And are you asking, do we have a set standard of weight equipment throughout the district? If that's the...
I'm asking to see if the equipment that we're purchasing.
No, sir. We're purchasing no equipment, nor do we have a set standard for weight room equipment.
Okay.
That's left to each athletic program.
Mr. Carlin,
Sir.
on the J. Harley Bonds Career Center, the main entrance upgrade, is that the front of the building or the back of the building?
Well, the part of the project was to really relocate the office area, and that is in the area. It's not the traditional front of the campus, it's the one to the side that has the large parking lot. It's that entrance.
So it's not the North Main Street entrance, it's the Van Deventer entrance?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
It's what you would think of as the main entrance to the old Greer High School.
Nick, what are we going to do to upgrade that?
Sir?
What are we going to do to upgrade that main entrance?
You're talking about the exterior, the actual exterior of the building?
I just want to know what we're going to do when we say we're going to do an upgrade on the main entrance. The main entrance to me is at the back of the building. The front of the building, Greer High School, is facing North Main Street. The back of the building, which happens to be right now the present entrance to Bonds Career Center, you cannot get to Bonds Career Center through the front entrance.
When they finish, you will be able to. Part of the if you look at relocation and upfit of these labs and classrooms, they're going back up into what you would think of as the main building of old Greer High after they're retrofitted to allow for expansion of those programs. At the end of the project, the main entrance for the Career Center will move from the back of the building, what you think of as the back, it will return to what you think of as the front of the building, where it was when Greer High was located in that building.
The main office is going to become the main office of the Career
Yes, sir.
Center.
Yes, sir.
Are they going to make any improvements on that?
Yes, sir.
When are we going to do that?
They're in the process of doing the work right now. I don't think they've started on the outside.
Not the
They're
outside,
doing
just the inside portion.
The more important part to us to get done is the classroom upfits. They're doing those right now.
Where are we going to move the Megatronics to?
What you would think of as the entry level to the main building from Main Street, which is really like the second floor.
I'm trying to understand, we no longer have a library. This year, we have got our internal auditor who has an office.
Internal auditor's been relocated to MT Anderson.
Oh, it has?
Yes, sir. We did that.
In that space now?
No, sir. That will become part of the retrofit and the rearrangement of the Career Center entrance.
Excuse me, Mr. Suddeth, I would like to, without objection, add 10 minutes.
The Megatronics, we have one downstairs. Are we going to add an additional, or are we going to move the one from downstairs upstairs?
They're moving the one from downstairs to upstairs to a room that is more conducive to that purpose. I believe that lab's currently in the old shop.
That's what I was going to say, the old shop area, yes, sir.
When you think about old Greer High, the old shop area, that's where Mechatronics is currently located. We're moving them to an upfitted facility inside the building, same building.
But we're moving them from the ground floor to the second floor.
Yes, which is really the main floor of the front entrance.
And we're going to have the main office up there also,
Yes, sir.
moving back. We've already got the welding lab in place of the gym.
Yes, sir.
We're going to put where the offices were.
There may likely be still some office presence back there. That would continue to be, to a degree, student entrance and bus drop-off, but the main entrance to the facility itself will be in what people think of when they drive up as the front.
Okay. We've got now where if you're up on the main floor, you can't go down to the first floor. You can go from the first floor to the main floor.
All that's being reconfigured. All the alternative programs will be on the top floor, and their access will be separate and restricted from the Career Center.
What about our middle school program?
Same thing. It would be on the top floor, separate with controlled access, separate from the Career Center.
Okay, so we're changing it from the second floor to the third floor.
Where all the alternative is on one floor with the individual separate secure access.
On the third floor, we already have part of that. Did we sell that to the city of Greer, or I'm trying to remember?
No, sir. We haven't sold any part of that building.
But we do have city of Greer on the third floor.
Not anymore. They may have had a presence up there doing something at some point in time.
So there's no facility on the third floor that's not ours.
No, sir, not anymore. There used to be, Greenville Literacy had a presence there. I don't think they've had one there in several years. What we have over there is adult ed and middle school alternative program. And we're looking at the possibility of offering the high school alternative program over there in addition to Sullivan Center. So there would be two physical locations, one on the west side of the district, one on the east side of the district for high school alternative. Because of the way we deliver that program now, it doesn't require the same amount of space as it used to. And we don't provide transportation to it, so there's not a transportation issue.
We looked at the area that was beside the main office. It's where we had the program for I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, I'll come back to that. Let me look at the boiler replacement at J. Harley Bonds. Is that the boiler on the ground floor?
I'm not aware of exactly where the boiler is, Mr. Suddeth. I could get that for you.
It's got listed here a boiler replacement, and it's got the J. Harley Bonds Career Center, and it's in progress. So I just wondered, the boiler that was on the ground floor, if they're going to replace that boiler, and I'd like to know how long that boiler has been there, because I thought they just had replaced that boiler. But anyway, the rooftop. What part of the Greer Middle School rooftop did we replace?
I believe that those were replacing existing units in kind, rooftop packaged equipment.
Is that the units, or is that the roof itself, or is it both?
If you're referring to,
It's HVAC units.
yes, then it's the rooftop equipment.
What about at Greer High School? We've replaced the rooftop unit there also.
We're actually, I believe, still waiting for that equipment. I believe we've done the preliminary work to make that equipment easily installed once it arrives. Just as a general note for mechanical equipment and other equipment in general, we're experiencing a lot of supply chain management delays with our roofing systems as well as our mechanical equipment. So this is one that I don't believe we've received the equipment yet.
So to clarify, we're not replacing the roof.
Not
We're replacing the unit
not as
that's on the
associated
roof.
with this project, no, sir.
And we're replacing the unit at Greer High School. How old is it, the unit?
The exact age, I'm not aware of that. I would have to get that for you.
Okay. I'd like to visit the school. Who do I need to get permission from?
I'm sorry, Ms. Sutherland, I didn't.
I'd like to visit that center. I'd like to,
You're welcome to come anytime if you want to walk through the, what they're doing. Probably be best to go with Mr. Carlin or his designee.
Be glad
I
to.
could answer your questions.
show me what we're doing.
Yes, sir, be glad to.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Sutter. Ms. Ventus Wells.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you, ma'am?
First of all, Summit Elementary looks fantastic.
Did you come up the back drive? Okay.
And everything's great. Parents might sit in line very early in the afternoon. There's a little bit of a traffic issue on Chicken Springs. I don't know if you've noticed or if you've heard if you've received any calls.
I'm aware we're having traffic issues on Chick Springs right now.
All right, well, good. So you know, how are we going to navigate that? Now, Chick Springs, I wish they had widened the road when they added the sidewalks, because that would have given parents an opportunity to just pull off to the side. But when you have them turning left into the drive and turning right into the drive, it basically shuts off and you've got to go down the middle of that road. And, I'm just trying to figure out what the solution may be. Do we put a law enforcement officer? Do we put someone there to direct traffic? How are we going to rectify that?
Well, I can tell you some of the things we're looking at right now. First of all, the city completing the traffic circle, which I think there's, I don't want to give a date, but I'd say they're sneaking up on it. Now that they've finished the retaining wall on the other side of the road, they've got the forms in place for the sidewalks and the curb and gutter. Get that in place and see how that impacts us. Ms. Brenda Bird is also working with Ms. It just went blank. Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Helms, to consider perhaps a portion of afternoon car rider in the rear where it is now.
Okay.
Rear of the facility off Chick Springs, as well as a portion off Summit Drive as well, to try to manage some of that traffic flow.
All right.
So lots of things being looked at right now, and I think we'll get the traffic circle in and see how that affects us, then start looking at perhaps sharing that traffic flow on both roads and see if we can alleviate some of that.
That would be great. I mean, everything's perfect and everything's great and everybody's so excited about that addition. But, you know, we're just running it. There's some people that are unaware that, you know, parents are in line at 1:30 or 1:15 for the children to get out at 2:15. And it's just backing up.
Yes, ma'am.
But I love it. I can't thank you enough. As far as the track fields at Wade Hampton, that's just, what are we doing with those track what are we doing for those repairs or updates or so?
The track repair?
I think I read where track and field, I could have made that up.
Okay,
I'm hoping I didn't, but I could have.
Yes, ma'am. All the track repairs as well. Okay, so every year, we are replacing tracks, or I should say every 3 years, we're replacing tracks and recoating tennis courts.
Yes.
That portion of the track was redone.
Okay, the renewal. And that track field is further down from Wade Hampton,
It is.
Okay, right. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I have, when they're not using the fields, a lot of people use them to walk. And so I was just trying to make sure I was up to date on it. So thank you so much for all you're doing, and I appreciate the update and the information.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I need to add more time because I have 2 other speakers. Are there any others that I don't have on my list? Okay, we'll add 10 more minutes. Mr. Say.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Colonel, I'm assuming that your supply chain comment earlier is based on the fact that everybody in construction right now is having horrible lead times on getting the hardware in place. Are there any of these units that are in such need of replacement that the delay in delivery is going to create a
warm classroom?
Yeah, a warm classroom.
Not that we're aware of right now.
Okay. Was Robert Cashin's a best building, Dr. Royster?
It was not a best building, it was,
Right at the end
it was,
before we
it
started
was in the
best.
transition. I'm trying to think back when you said
Yeah,
that.
that's perfectly okay, because the reason
It's best era, so it's not very old.
I didn't bring my right spreadsheet. I've got one that has that.
well, no, the
on
only
every
reason I
school.
ask is we've got Eastside, which is a best building, up for a boiler replacement. I'm assuming that's part of the Mars process.
That is correct.
So we're looking at only a 20-year life cycle for boilers?
In that case, yes.
Okay,
I don't know that that's consistent with all our boilers, but the one at Eastside, yes.
okay.
I suspect part of that was, that may not have been the best manufacturer unit for that application,
We also need
but
to,
I'm suspecting.
Mr. Carlin, you may or may not be able to speak to this in here today, but there is an existing portion of East Side that would have had HVAC. East Side, and I know you all
old
remember this.
gymnasium and the-
It's a renovation, even though all of the building except the gym and the auditorium are new. I don't know the age of the systems in the gym or the auditorium, and I don't know if Mr. Carlin can speak to that right now, whether this is the main building or the system that serves the gym and the auditorium.
Okay.
And no, sir, unfortunately, I'm not sure.
Well, we'll check on that and let you know.
Not a problem. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Ms. Dolan?
Thank you. Good morning, Colonel Carlin.
Hello.
Is there a projected date when the field drainage issue will be taken care of at Hillcrest?
I believe that is the one where a couple attempts were made to get out there, but because it has been so wet, they have not been able to attack that one. But as soon as we get some dry weather, then the plan is to finish that one up as well.
And is it specifically the baseball field? Or do you know?
I thought, I would have to verify.
Okay. I've also been contacted by a family there that is having trouble maneuvering over the gravel because one of their family members is in a wheelchair. And I wondered if the spectator paths is supposed to be ADA compliant, because I don't know if anyone's been in a wheelchair, but you can't get through gravel. That's a burden if you're in a wheelchair. So I just wondered if that was something that needed to be addressed, that it has now come up.
Okay. I can definitely look into that.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is not something that's listed in our report, but It's also come up that there's a sidewalk issue at Rudolph Gordon and that there's not a sidewalk for walkers. Or y'all may know about it because I'm sure it came up when it was built.
The issue there, as I recall it, there is a sidewalk across the street from the school that serves the development that was put in after the original school was constructed. When we added the middle school side to the school, the SCDOT review and approval, they put a crosswalk in at the signalized intersection, which is the safest place to put a crosswalk in. And it does connect with a sidewalk to the school, to the best of my recollection. I think, isn't that right, Mr. Davey? You've been down there. We have a group of people who reside in that community that would like to cross in the middle of the block. SCDOT initially would not approve that, traditionally does not approve that, and it is the least safe place to cross the road, obviously, in the middle of the block. So that has come up several times since the school was occupied. This latest time, apparently they asked someone at SCDOT locally about putting in a crosswalk, and they got some, I believe, some fairly affirmative response about that. However, that's not SCDOT's regional engineering office that makes those decisions or determinations. That's done on a statewide basis by Mark Falk, who is the SCDOT point person for all things related to schools. So whenever we construct, renovate, or more importantly, change any means of ingress or egress to a school, it really isn't OSF that approves that, it is SCDOT through Mark Falk's office. Because this has come back up again, we'll ask them to review it again, but at this point, his stance is still remains that is not the safest place to cross the street. And if you've been down there, and you probably have, and you've seen the traffic in the morning, I would agree that's not the safest place to cross the street. The safest place to cross is always a signalized intersection. It's a little further down, requires you to walk a little bit further, but that is always the safest place. They've also brought forward the idea of putting in a crosswalk in the middle of the block, so to speak, and to have it have a crossing guard there. Well, we're struggling right now, the sheriff's office is, they supply all the crossing guards throughout the county, whether the schools are in a city or in a county. They're struggling right now to find enough crossing guards to man the existing crossings. And in fact, several years ago, we actually had to reduce the number of guarded, so to speak, crossings because of their difficulty in recruiting them. So we're aware of that issue and we're looking into that issue, but I'm not sure how that may go with SCDOT.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ms. Wells?
I had one question related to the mechanical units in the MARS program, but Mr. Saylor's covered that for me. On the track and field, or the tennis court and track and field renewals, renovations, are those on a schedule? Are we inspecting and grading condition and then putting them in a schedule based on condition? How are we prioritizing what we're doing with renovations, replacements, et cetera?
It is on a schedule, and I believe we get done, I think we're doing about every 3 years. We're doing either a full-blown replacement or we're doing repairs depending on the need at the time.
Okay, so we have a schedule to say we're going to go to these 4 schools. We go at that timing and then assess and decide what needs to be done.
That's correct.
As opposed to kind of looking at 15 high schools and saying, well, here's the condition of all of them, and then every year trying to reshuffle.
And not necessarily going out there and doing a replacement just because it's on the year, but doing it as the need dictates.
We're trying to keep those two on a staggered schedule. They were you may recall, they were installed on a staggered schedule, which helped to set it up to have, because they got a life cycle, and hopefully they're set up in a way that they don't all hit at one time.
So that was kind of the other question. Are we getting do we have the life cycle out of those, particularly the tracks that we expected? Or do we need to look at something different? Because it seemed, I guess Hillcrest, I know, had already put theirs in themselves. They had done their own upgrade when they they did their track upgrade before the district took over that cost.
Well, I'm not sure about the history, but I know that theirs was done this summer.
Right. So are we seeing, is there any concern that we need to be looking at a different type of track surface? Are we getting the life expectancy that we thought we would get out of the tracks?
I think, from what I understand, we're getting good performance out of the surfaces we're putting down now.
Okay, so that's just something I know, like the city of Greenville, they've changed course on how they're handling some of their trail systems where they've used kind of the softer running surface, and they're gonna take a lot of that out and get rid of it because it just wasn't really working with their application. And then to follow up on Ms. Doolin's question about the traffic. So I do know that in the recent past, SCDOT has begun to approve mid-block crossings, with lights and with specific, you actually have to have the traffic control in place to do so. So it just kind of brings a question up that I had related to Rudolph Gordon, but also potentially Fountain Inn, because I think I asked this many months ago. And then in general, knowing that we have trouble with buses, so we potentially are getting more car riders, and we would like to encourage more walkers and bikers, even beyond the bus routes. Have we done any deliberate studies or research at our schools to look at how we could improve pedestrian access and safety and mobility? So specific to the two new
Dr.
schools.
Royster, before you answer that, is this gonna be a long answer? Do I need to increase time?
Maybe, yeah. Mr.
Okay.
Suddeth might be best to weigh in on whether my answers are lengthy or not. He
Let
sometimes
me
says
increase,
they're too lengthy.
That's my last question.
let me increase for 2 minutes without
All right, I'll try to
exception.
do it in 2 minutes.
Okay.
You may recall, we commissioned through a traffic engineering firm a study of traffic patterns at our, I believe it was 10 schools where we had the greatest traffic congestion. Now, right, Philip, we're 10, 7 or 10?
Yes, sir, I think that's right. I'll double check the number.
They started, and we got one completed before COVID invaded all of our business. Last year, with only 70% of parents choosing for their children to come in person and 30% choosing virtual, we suspended the traffic studies because it wouldn't give you a true picture. So they have now re-engaged those traffic studies, so we'd have to send you some kind of update on where they are on them.
But who's doing that? What's the?
Gay Sprague's company.
Okay, and she's retiring, so we might.
Yes, but I believe she's committed to,
she say she's
committed to finishing all our studies that they engaged to do. Because again, when we engaged these, we didn't dream it would take 3 years to get them done. It should have taken maybe a year, year and a half.
The only caveat on that is that's specific to traffic and traffic counts and vehicle congestion, but if we could add a component that has to do with pedestrian access, safety, and volume as well.
I think they look at that, but we'll make sure they do.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, without exception, I have one more speaker. I have 2 more speakers. Let's increase it for 10 minutes. Ms. Glenda Morrison-Fair.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell. I just wanted to echo what Mrs. Doolin said. I appreciate her bringing up the handicap accessible, and I just wanted to know, and I'm sure we do this in the district, how involved is Mrs. Hogan's department when we do when we put our facilities out? Because it might seem like a small problem, but for people who are disadvantaged or handicapped, it is a large problem. So I'd like to.
They're involved in.
She's involved. Her department is involved.
They're involved in initial school facility planning, as we'd involve every department throughout the district. Every one of our facilities is ADA compliant. All of our athletic facilities are ADA compliant. What we sometimes find is people want to go to a place that does not have ADA compliant access. When I say go to a place, I don't mean go to the baseball field. Go to some particular point on that field or somewhere else. So if you have a concern or complaint expressed to you about that, we need to have that person referred to us so we can see, have we somehow missed some facility that doesn't have appropriate ADA access from parking to the spectator seating? Or is it simply someone that, well, I'd rather sit over here than sit over here, because that does sometimes happen. So we want to make sure that we have appropriate and safe ADA access to every one of our facilities.
All right, thank you, that's only comment.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison Fair. Mr. Sutter?
Mr. Carlin, the athletic field drainage at Greer High, is that the school or the stadium? We have an athletic field drainage renovation at Greer High School. Is we talking about the drainage at the high school or at the stadium?
That should be the stadium. Also, as a follow-up to Ms. Doolin's question on at Hillcrest, that is the football field as well.
Football field
Yes,
and
ma'am.
baseball field?
Football field.
Oh, will you also look at the baseball field? Because that's what, there seem to be more complaints.
I'm sorry, is Mr. Sutter still talking? Ms.
Yes.
Dillon?
I'm sorry, I thought that was directed to me.
Yeah, please don't, thank you. Are you finished, Mr. Sutter?
That's coming from down there.
Yeah, I know, but I was directing it down there. Are you finished? Are you,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
still?
My goal was to be shorter than Dr. Royster.
Okay, Ms. Dillon, do you want, okay, now, Ms. Dillon.
My apologies,
I
Ms. Doolan. I think I
apologize.
created that.
Thank you for that update. And while y'all are there looking at the football field, which I'm sure is equally as important, will you also ask about the drainage at the baseball field?
We will look at that as well.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
I see somebody else. Ms. Wells.
Ms. Gibbon Call, Mr. Lewis is on the call, though he's not here, so I wanted to see if I could just offer something for him because he can't speak.
Okay, I increased it for 10 minutes, I think. We're within those 10 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So can we get an update on the new elementary school at the JL Mann site, and specifically, what's our timeline for getting community feedback on the design, to solicit the community feedback?
The way we would do community feedback on design is have some proposals for them to comment on, just sort of general proposals. I don't know that we've established a timeline. We spent some time last week, in fact, a considerable amount of time, looking at a possible focus for the school. I think we're really close to that. We need the focus in order to give some direction to the architects and engineers related to the inside, not related to the outside. But we want them to have that in mind as they're moving forward. So I'd say very soon, but we do not have a firm timeline for, we're going to ask input on October the 23rd or something like that.
Okay. And in that process, do you get feedback from the PTA, SICs, and surrounding elementary schools, or in the community? How is it you're kind of deciding what that focus looks like?
We have ordinarily looked at our programs throughout the district to see what we might be missing as far as programmatically, and also what we might look at to make sure we have a stream from elementary to high school, and we use that to determine what we believe the instructional focus ought to be. It'd be a little challenging to involve the community with the inside and with that programmatic side, because we don't really know what that community is going to be. The community we would involve in the exterior design would be the neighborhood community, because that's who's impacted by the appearance of the building.
Okay. So you're not really, in that way then, I guess your vehicle for getting any of that kind of input from, those, what will be a feeder pattern, right? So be Mann and those folks. You're just using, I guess, the administration of those schools to kind of help inform that?
Without going too much in depth, because I don't think we're really ready to talk about it yet, we've looked at what we have high school, what we have middle school, and what we have at Roper Mountain. and how all those things might tie together with something we don't yet have at an elementary school. Because if you think about it, the proposed relief area for this new school aligns with the proposed or the relief area for Tennessee Fisher Middle School.
And then on the fields, are those going to continue to be used by JL Man or not?
Yes, there is no space at the JL Man main campus for any additional fields. We've basically built to our property line there. We tried to get the availability of some adjacent property in the past. That's just not really ever worked out. And it's becoming even less likely in the future.
You'll engage them at some point when you have to kind of start thinking about function on the site and that kind of thing, I guess.
Right, and what they are very well aware of is their fields stay where they are as they are. The field they chose to use for a practice area, which is where the former school sat, they were well informed when they started. If you choose to do this, understand that's a future school site, and you're only going to have it until we put a school there. So they are aware of that. They didn't have that practice area when the school existed there either. They have a practice area behind the new school, inside the track area, and then we'll look at what possibilities might exist on the, I guess it would be the southwest corner of the property, which is between the stadium and the development, which is on, was that Isbell Lane, Isbell Drive? There's an area up there that might be, I don't know if it's a 100-yard practice field, but might give them a 70, 80-yard practice field, which coaches can adapt to use in lieu of a 100-yard field.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? That completes the buildings and grounds section. Back to you, Ms. Bush.
Thank you, Ms. McCullough. We still remain ahead of schedule, so that puts the pressure on me. We'll start the instruction portion of our into the whole meeting, and the first item on there is an appointments to Coordinated School Health Advisory Council.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. I'm going to turn this section over to Mr. McCoy, and she's behind you over your other shoulder. I think you were probably looking for Ms. Bell. She's back there over your right shoulder.
Thank you. We don't have a formal presentation. I will just review briefly with you the C-Shack, since it's been a few years since we have, every couple of years we bring members. So this is just a brief overview, and then Ms. Bell, who runs our, back in the table there, who runs our committee and members and all of that, certainly can answer any questions. So the C-Shack obviously stands for the Coordinated School Health and Advisory Council, that's established by your board policy and also the Student Health and Fitness Act of 2005 and the USDA. The council utilizes the State Department of Ed recognized Healthier Generation School Health Assessment to guide the priorities and the action plan. The school health assessment addresses the following topics: physical activity and physical education, nutrition, tobacco use prevention, alcohol and other drug use prevention, chronic health conditions such as asthma, food allergies, etc., unintentional injury and violence prevention on the safety side, and sexual health. In the past, the C-Shack has successfully worked to help implement some of the things with the board as a whole, such as increasing opportunities for physical activity before, during, and after our school programs, improve communications regarding wellness programs, our goals and incentives, providing additional education for students and staff on sexual abuse and misconduct, and expanding the backpack program. The C-Shack member composition was determined using the guidance from the Healthy Generations Assessment Toolkit and also the district policy, which specifies the roles, the number of people in those roles, and how those individuals are selected and served terms. The assessment toolkit provides specifics of what the USDA requires and the examples of each of those roles. There are 4 district staff members. There are 2 board members, 6 school representatives that are appointed by the superintendent or his designee. There are 4 to 6 community members, which serve a 3-year term, and 2 parents that serve a 3-year term, and 2 students who serve 1-year terms, also appointed by the superintendent or his designee. For this current process that you have before you with the members, the last May we posted the announcement on the website. It's in order to fill the community and specifically the parent roles. Those who wish to apply can complete a questionnaire that provides insight on what they could potentially offer to the council, given those topics we mentioned above. Whether those would be related to their educational background, previous experiences, current profession, or expressed interests. There were a total of 31 applications received. However, the greater majority of those stated in their applications that the primary reason they were wishing to serve on the council was related to COVID-19 and associated protocols. These candidates were not selected as COVID protocols fall outside our CSHAC's purview. Again, it's those topics we mentioned above. Individuals that were chosen for the community role were representatives from community-based organizations Live Well Greenville and the Bradshaw Institute for Community Child Health and Advocacy, a retired school nurse and a financial planner, insurance broker with a health and PE background that has volunteered in schools in the past. The individual chosen for the parent role articulated in their application a personal perspective from both their own and their child's experience in our schools, along with a professional background that could help in developing and working towards solutions. When selecting applications or applicants, priority was placed on individuals who we felt could bring a wealth of knowledge and resource to the committee, and when combined with the individuals filling the other roles, provide a diverse group in terms of both race, ethnicity, gender, and grade level. Thank you, Ms. Bush.
Madam Chairman, make a motion to approve the members of the CSHAC as presented.
Thank you. I also have been asked to serve on this committee, and I submitted some questions about the members selected. Specifically, I thought that maybe I'm the only one, maybe there would be others, but I found it interesting that there were so many community members selected that are from the same organization, and I wondered how that would appear when we are trying to diversify and include more people from the community. But I don't know any of these people personally, and maybe they are the greatest to serve on this committee. But I know Debbie also serves on the Live Well board, and there were 3 out of the 6 community members that are also associated with Live Well. And I don't know how the rest of the board feels about having 4 representatives from one organization serve on this committee, but I brought it up because that's something that I noticed. I'm only 1 vote out of 12 here, so, you know, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I brought it up because I noticed it. Thank you.
I think this, if we haven't all seen it in the last 10 years, we've certainly seen in the last 2 that this committee really is a key piece of what we need to do. So I'm glad that we had the legislative driver, regulatory driver to kind of put it in place, but I'm glad that we have a strong committee. And I'm glad we have a lot of community support, but I guess I would agree with Ms. Doolin that I think the more organizations we have with a voice and a seat at the table, the better. So I know we don't have a specific requirement that says, you know, only one person from an organization, but, you know, were there any other organizations or any other community members that represented other organizations that applied or that were considered before these appointments were made, or these were brought to us?
Ms. Bell.
No, not as far as nonprofit organizations that specifically worked in the field of health and fitness and nutrition with children. There were other organizations, not organizations, but others that had professional backgrounds, but they weren't speaking for their organization.
Okay. So I guess I would just say that I think it's the more people we have at the table with diverse perspectives, the better. So if we, as we move forward, I mean, Live Well's done tremendous work for this community and with us, so they are a solid partner within the district, and I want us to continue that. But I know that's going to continue regardless of, you know, how many seats they might have at the table here. So just in the interest of trying to expand, you know, the thought that we have coming in this committee, I would like to see us in the future. You know, at this point, I'm not sure would reverse course, but certainly in the future, look in that regard. And then following up on the number of applicants, there were, how many applicants that had specifically said they were interested in the COVID protocols? That was 30, you said?
There were 30 total. The majority of them, I don't have the number. I'd have to count through those numbers.
So when we got those, did we give those, any of those applicants an opportunity to we kind of go back and say, hey, this isn't what we're focused on. Do you have other interests? I guess I know that in the last 2 years, that's been at the top of everyone's mind. You know, so that would be the first thing you might think you want to put on an application. When you don't, you maybe, that's the first thing you're thinking about. So was there an opportunity for those folks to kind of go back and say, hey, you applied, you volunteered, but this isn't, we aren't going to be dealing with those issues. We're specifically looking at these components, and giving them an opportunity to express, you know, to either decline and say, okay, then I'm not interested, or, well, I also have a really intense desire to help with mental health issues and, you know, nutrition and health. Did we do anything like that, or did we just?
We did not. We made it very clear in the introduction of the application of what CSHAC does, what it stood for, and the types of things that we have worked on in the past. And so we added that description before. So no, we did not go back and clarify or say, you know, no, this is not having anything to do with COVID, but I felt like our description, our introduction made that pretty clear.
Okay, and I think I remember that we had that on our website. And then how did we push that out outside of being on the website?
Just on the website.
Okay, so we didn't send any emails out or do any sort of promotion of that? Okay, I think it may be that as we look at, maybe this, the stakeholders that are working on the diversity initiative that we have, maybe that one thing that group might consider helping us with is understanding how do we make sure we engage the whole community and push out that message, because there are probably some people that are really passionate about that, but they don't go to our website on a regular basis. I don't go to our website on a regular basis unless I'm going to look for something that triggers specific, okay, I need to go look for something. So.
One thing that I was going to add in my response to all of those that applied are that each school has a CSHAC. They should each have one. That's actually where the district CSHAC, you know, takes that information from each school in order to develop priorities and action plans. And so we need their information. And so I think it's important that if you have an interest in this, or if you apply for this one, that I would also recommend looking in. Every school is required to have a local CSHAC committee.
That's a great point. And I hope, so similarly, I hope that our schools are doing a good job of promoting that to their community, to say we need volunteers from the school and the community to engage. I mean, certainly we know social media is a great way to get people to push things out and share those opportunities. So, okay, thank you, Ms. Bush.
Thank you. I appreciate all that you're doing with CSHAC. I really do, and I think you need to be commended. I do understand Ms. Doolin's concern. If you're looking at this and you don't know the history and you see so many from a specific organization that has done well, and I've attended many of those breakfasts where we've highlighted all the schools. And because of COVID, I know that's caused like a shadow over everything, and we can't do what we used to do. But I do feel like maybe we need to look at updating that application and seeing if we can send it out to a lot of various organizations so that we can get different looks, different thoughts, different mindsets that can really take us to the next level. And goodness gracious, we know that we're going to be at many levels now because we're dealing with so many different things that affect our children. So I agree with Ms. Wells about the website. Sometimes, you know, I don't go to our website to look for anything as well, and for me to have to go and specifically look for that application, I probably wouldn't, if I wasn't on the board, I wouldn't know where to look. So I think we need to probably be more vigilant in getting the word out for these committee members. But once again, I appreciate all that you're doing, and thank you. And I'm glad that Ms. Bush and Ms. Doolin are serving, and it brings different eyes and ears and thoughts to the committee. So thank you. Thank you.
Question? Mr. Sutter.
Mr. McCoy,
Yes, sir.
if I wanted to become more familiar with I'm looking at the curriculum design, the health and wellness education. It says here that there's South Carolina academic standards for health and safety.
Yes, sir.
Do we have a copy of that?
I can get you a copy of them, Mr.
How
Sutter.
can I get that?
I can get it to Ms.
If
Fitzer,
you
who
would
can
get
send it
that
out,
to me, I
sure.
appreciate it. Thank you, that's all I have.
No further discussion? I do have one question. Have we been in contact with those people that applied for this committee to make sure that they do know that they can contact their local school and serve in the same capacity on their local school, which is probably of a much greater value, if not the same value, as serving on this district level, because that is where we obtain our information from and our direction from at the district level.
I have that email ready. I was waiting until we had our member approval before I moved any further. So I've got it all ready to go. So I'll send that out.
Thank you so much. All right, if there's no further questions, we have a motion on the floor to approve the members of the CSHAC as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right, the next item on our agenda is the summer remediation and support programs. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. I've asked Mr. McCoy to share with you today all those numerous efforts that we undertook over the summer to try to fill gaps and shortfalls with individual students to make sure that we have students where they need to be. He's going to talk about what we did over the summer. As you know, those things continue through this school year. They will continue into next summer, and they will very likely also continue into the following school year. In fact, as we come forward to you with a final plan for the use of the largest and third allocation of ESSER funding, we would intend to continue to provide this kind of support through the life of those funds, simply because, unrelated to whatever gap they might have, we know, based on our experience with using interventionists, that it improves students' academic performance over time. So we'll want to continue that through the life of these funds in an accelerated way through, I think they end in the spring of 24 is the last spin down, Ms. Stack?
September 2024.
September of 24. Yeah. So through the 23-24 school year, which we've not brought to you yet, but just to kind of give you an idea that that's on the horizon. Mr. McCoy?
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Dr. McDavid is going to go through the specifics of our summer programs, as she and Ms. Dean are heavily involved in really running those for us. As Dr. Royster mentioned to you, if you'll recall, leading up to that, we did have interventionists in place, additional interventionists than we normally have in place last school year. Again, using those strategies we know have worked in the past for our students in the past, even pre-COVID. And then, of course, this summer, you all approved, and this summer and next summer, you approved funding for summer school, additional summer school. Our summer schools, as you know, are typically fairly small. Some schools run some local programs. This was a much more every school, minus the ones that had construction. Every school hosted summer school this year, I believe, except for 7 or 10 of the construction schools that we had going on. Offered summer school, which is a much larger effort than we typically hold. Typically 3-4 schools is what we do as a district effort in the past. So this is a little bit more, you'll see a lot more higher numbers, of course, of kids that attended, which is always a good thing. And some of the data around our Read to Succeed program that is required for 3rd grade will also be lumped into this presentation. So Dr. McDavid?
Thank you very much. Members of the board, it is an exciting opportunity to share today, but before we begin, I want to reiterate that the summer remediation and support programs was a huge collaboration on part of our administration, the assistant superintendents of leadership, working with schools, our facilities, transportations, food and nutrition services. Everyone worked together to really provide a robust experience for many students across Greenville County schools. So as we share today, we are going to discuss an overview of each program, including that 3rd grade Read to Succeed summer camp, our elementary and middle school remediation and support camps, our high school content and recovery camps. We'll discuss initial credit, and each of those will share the demographics of the programs and the outcomes. Overall, this chart shows the number of students who participated in summer remediation and support. 3,485 elementary students, 1,789 middle school students, and 3,523 high school students participated in summer activities in 2021. You can tell by the grade levels as they peaked. There are certain grade levels that were targeted for strategic improvement and to help bridge the gaps. We call these our summer bridge programs because we are bridging the gap, creating a scaffold for our students to reach from where they were in the prior year to where they needed to be to start this school year off successfully. The demographics of the 8,757 students who participated in summer remediation represents male-female gender, 53% male and 47% female. We did see 75% of the students we served were pupils in poverty. In the demographics of ethnicity, our Black or African American students represented 34%. While our white and Caucasian represented 37%. Those are our 2 largest groups. Our Hispanic or Latino, you see represented there in the light grayish, 22%. So the others were in areas of 1 to 5%. We did see a representation of our English language learners, which we call multi-language learners, formerly referred to as ESOL, English speakers of other languages, represented almost 20% of the students served in our programs for summer remediation. We'll begin with the elementary, K through 5. Those programs operated for 4 weeks, 4 days per week, Monday through Thursday. All of our programs were closed on Friday. We ran the Summer Bridge program from June 21st to July 22nd, and were closed the week of July 4th. The elementary programs ran from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. In meeting the Read to Succeed summer reading camp requirements, we added 30 additional minutes for our Read to Succeed 3rd grade students to gain a total of 96 required hours, excluding lunch. All locations, as Mr. McCoy said, all locations except those that were holding construction or maintenance hosted students. Our East North Street students were hosted at Lake Forest, Heritage hosted by Slater Marietta, Robert E. Cashin students attended Greenbrier, and Summit Drive Elementary students went to Stone Academy. In those cases, we had administrators, assistant administrators from both sites serving the students. So they were hosted, but they had the advantage of having someone who knew all the students and all the parents on site where they were being hosted. The middle program ran similarly with the same dates of operation. The hours were different in that they ran from 8 to 12:30 p.m. and we only had 3 schools that had construction or maintenance projects, and you can see where they were hosted. It is important to note that we had to stagger the start and end times of our summer programs so that transportation would have time to drop off and pick up students from the different levels, elementary, middle, and high, without putting them all on the same buses. Our high school summer bridge program was also one that ran 4 days per week. However, we were able to extend the opportunities beginning on June 7th. June 7th, the students could participate in content recovery and credit recovery through July 15th. They were also closed the week of July 4th and on Fridays, but they had a longer period of operation as students were working to complete content or credit recovery. When they were complete, they were able to discontinue coming to the summer bridge activity. The hours of operations were 8 to 1:30, and only one high school, Malden High School, was hosted by J.O. Mann. All other high schools and programs hosted their very own sites this summer. Again, the collaboration, all sites had free meals by Food Nutritional Services. Transportation was provided. We were able to have nurses assigned to each quadrant. To our third grade Read to Succeed legislation, you are very familiar with it. It is designed to help students apply their reading and writing skills across the school day and in all academic disciplines. Specifically, the third grade Read to Succeed camp is a requirement of the Read to Succeed legislation and was hosted as part of each elementary school summer bridge program. This shows the difference between the two. And the traditional elementary summer bridge programs, we focused on both ELA and math. We focused on instruction and remediation and were hosted at all the sites. For the third grade Read to Succeed, those students who were selected were focused solely on ELA instruction as is required by the Read to Succeed guidelines. They had dedicated third grade teachers who were Read to Succeed endorsed, 1 per site at a minimum. The media centers were open. They used the leveled literacy intervention, a research-based tool that we have used for multiple years in Greenville County schools, and we kept our student to teacher ratio at 15 to 1 or less. Throughout the elementary programs, elementary and middle, we did keep our student to teacher ratio at 15 to 1 or less. With the Read to Succeed, of course, we had to do evidence-based reading instruction. We used the LLI. We identified our struggling readers early. They were identified based on SC Ready, our statewide assessment, in a category of not met 1. The students received targeted, comprehensive support. We maintain ongoing communication with parents, sending letters throughout the year, having meetings with parents throughout the year, and then finalizing at the end of the summer with that final notation as to whether or not the students were required to attend summer reading camp in order to be promoted to the next grade level. We held pre-service and in-service training for teachers to help them work with the students, and we held opportunities for proficiency to help our students to prepare for the next grade level. All of this is research-based and is in the Greenville County Schools reading plan. Our third grade summer reading camp went as follows. There were 710 students who were identified under Read to Succeed. That is, they scored not met 1 in reading on SC Ready. To give context, in 2018, there were 321 students who were not met one. So in the year of COVID, we had 710. All 710 of these students were invited. Remember, the schools were having conversations with the parents as early as the fall, and were continually sharing with them the efforts that were going on throughout the school year to help the students to attain the own grade level reading. Of those 710, 231 were required to participate in summer camp in order to be promoted to 4th grade. 479 of the 710 were eligible for promotion due to what the Read to Succeed legislation refers to as good cause exemptions. While all students were invited, there were 304 who were students with disabilities, or 504 who were not required to attend. There were 42 students with limited English proficiency levels that were such that they were not required to attend. 46 students had previously been retained and had intervention, again, not required, and 87 had demonstrated proficiency or mastery through the GCS portfolios. That portfolio review took place in May so that we could ascertain whether or not what was happening with the students in May and June was partially with the test, or were there other indicators already that would show that the students had demonstrated mastery. Again, 231 were required to participate. Of all of the 3rd graders, 323 actually did participate out of those 710. So more than were required participated. 216 of the 231 attended the summer reading camp. 13 of the 231 did not attend as required. There were 2 that we subtracted from the total of 231 because they moved to another district. So we no longer had access to have them in our summer reading camp. So 229 required to attend summer reading camp for promotion. Who are those students? Again, you see the demographics. We had slightly more males than females. Our pupils in poverty represented 94% of those 229 students. In ethnicity, we had a majority of Black or African American students, followed second by 31% Hispanic or Latino. We looked at our multi-language learners, and of the 229, 29%, almost 30% were multi-language learners. Outcomes. For the 229 students who were required to attend, we mentioned again, 216 actually attended, 94.3% of those who were required. 126 of those were promoted based on meeting the state-designed cut score for MAP, the Measures of Academic Progress. That assessment was required for all summer reading camp Read to Succeed students. Of our 216, over half of them actually were promoted based on reaching that level set by the State Department of Education on MAP. 90 were promoted based on their GCS portfolio review. That is to say, for all of those who did or did not meet the cut score on MAP, we also held a portfolio review to see if they made progress over the summer. Students were required to show progress with the level literacy intervention to have regular attendance, and 90 students were promoted based on the portfolio review. Of the 13 who did not attend summer reading camp, we also communicated with those, 5.6% of them, their parents. They were retained. We did not have evidence that the students showed growth over the summer by any other measure, and summer reading camp was not eligible. They did not attend, so we couldn't consider that. So 3 of the parents actually wanted them retained so that they could gain a stronger foundation in reading, and we had no parents to appeal the retention decision. The letters were sent, the parents had a time period by which they could appeal the decision to be retained, and we did not receive any in the appeal window. So to note, all 216 who participated in summer reading camp were promoted. On to the K through 8 summer bridge programs for remediation and support. We had elementary, 3,485 students, and middle levels, 1,749 students. Those student invitations were based on performance, grades, and students who were in need of support. Many of them were already participating in the after-school remediation for academic. Many of them were coming before school for remediation, those who arrived early on the buses. So the schools actually extended invitations based upon students they saw were a little bit farther behind and needed that bridge to be ready for the upcoming school year. These students were not necessarily what we would say failing, but the schools identified they needed additional support. All of the grades were served at the 47 elementary schools and 17 middle schools. We did a district pre-assessment and post-assessment so that we could target instructional support. Pre-assessments, we identified as an academics team those key standards, what we call priority standards. Those are those that are essential for success at the next level. We knew that over the summer we could not reteach everything, but we wanted to target our efforts over those key standards that students would need to master to be successful at the next level. I shared an example of a 7th grade standard for number sense to apply the concepts of all 4 operations with rational numbers to solve real world and mathematical problems. That was an area in the pretest. If students did not do well on that area, then we had targeted district curriculum and school-based curriculum to help students to master that so that they could be ready for the 8th grade. In curriculum, we had district design and some school-based curriculum resources that were both aligned to the resources students used throughout the year and would be using in subsequent grade levels. The ratio, again, 15:1 student to teacher in each of our summer remediation programs. For our outcomes, our elementary students improved an average of 1.2 levels in reading, representing approximately 2 months of growth through the level literacy intervention. They used the Fountas and Pinnell levels for pre and post. Middle school students used a pre and post test. The middle level students improved an average of 12.5 points from the pre to the post assessments. In math, the elementary students improved an average of 16.3 points from pre to post, and middle schools increased an average of 6.9 points from pre to post. That is to show growth, and our students were actually in pre to post. We had some students who started later or did not end with us, so we're not able to test them all. But for those that tested pre and post, those were the growth numbers in terms of the points. Grades 9 through 12, our high school summer bridge of remediation and support, representing over 3,500 students. We hosted at our high schools, again, except one, which was hosted at Malden at J.L. Mann, but we had also our Lifelong Learning Center and our satellite diploma programs, which are hosted at career centers. We had 16 high schools and programs. They had content and credit recovery labs, and we had certified teachers providing support and tutoring. Initial credit was offered virtually. That is an extension or support that helps to accelerate some students. We offer that through our Greenville County Virtual School Program, which has been in place for years. And we have the South Carolina Virtual School, which students took part in as well. The South Carolina Virtual School is our first modality of offering initial credit, but we also use our in-house Greenville County Virtual School Program. Before we share the results, we want to differentiate or explain the difference between our content recovery and our credit recovery. By the uniform grading policy, content recovery is done during the class while the student is still enrolled with the teacher of record. Content recovery allows the student to retake a subset of the course, including what may be a single unit, more than a unit, some supplemental assignments or activities that are approved by the teacher of record. The teachers may also provide assignments or use content from other online platforms. This was happening throughout the year, last year with the high schools, And we had, through June 14th, students were able to recover content from their 2021 courses in accordance with our guidelines with a deadline for content recovery. So for those who had not yet failed, content recovery is our first line of support. Before they fail the course, we want to give them all the support to master the content while they're with their teacher of record. If they do not, then we move to credit recovery. But content recovery was used a great deal throughout the year, and in the summer, we were able to extend that through June 14th. Credit recovery is done after a class has been failed. So the students who did not pass the class, it targets that specific components or a subset of the standards to address those deficiencies necessary for a student to show proficiency in the overall course. So students who previously failed a course may recover the credit through a credit recovery process. All schools must use a district-approved credit recovery instructional software, and the students will receive at the end a P for passed or an NP for not passed for the course. Credit recovery, it's important to note, does not impact the GPA. The student gets the original GPA for the failed course. They get the grade points for the F, but the credit recovery comes along as a separate, and it shows that the student has credit for the course in terms of meeting graduation requirements, but it does not impact the grade point average. And then there was initial credit, in which students could earn initial credit through SC Virtual or our Greenville County Virtual School Program. The results in our high school summer school, almost 5,000 credits were recovered this summer, 4,976 as recorded through Power School as a separate course called Credit Recovery. In the Greenville County Virtual School Program, there were 647 initial credits earned, and in South Carolina Virtual School, where students were accelerating, over 1,500 initial credits were earned by our students. When all of these were put together, we had 101 summer graduates. 76 of those 101 summer graduates were counted towards our 2021 graduation rates. 23 counted as fifth-year graduates, and 2 of our students were early graduates. So those numbers exceeded what we have done in the past in summer graduation, but it was the result of students being able to recover credits and do some initial credits at a rate higher than we have done in the past. With those, we've shared now our programs and the data, demographics, and outcomes. Are there questions?
Thank you, Dr. McDavid. I always look forward to this. It gives us so much data, but also it reminds me that no matter how we change in our schools, we always have what we did last summer is always our report. So even to the board, as a child, I know many of us look forward to that, and you planned it all summer was what you were going to tell the whole class that you did last summer. So it's always exciting to hear what we as a district did last summer. So I do have some people already with questions. Ms. LaVentus Wales.
Are you?
Doing well.
Thank you for your report. I have a question. 710 third graders were identified throughout our district.
Yes.
And we have, there were 47 elementary schools that were involved in this, and we have 52 elementary schools. We only had 710 out of all those third grade classes that were ones that were chosen to be in this?
Yes.
How does that happen? It just seems like I'm listening to so many parents in the who have elementary school children, and it was a very difficult time during this COVID, and it's difficult now as well. But only 710. I mean, I know that's a lot, but to me, that's not really a lot after everything we've been through this past year and the year before. So how do we come up with that?
Can we speak in the microphone so everybody can hear?
It's on.
Yeah,
I'm
but
speaking.
when you're facing that way, nobody
Sorry, Chuck, I want you to hear this. Thank you. Sorry, my apology. Anyway, how did we come up with the 710? I know you have a plan, but it just seems like that's such a low number to me after everything that we've been experiencing.
Last year, that was a great fear for many, that our students, more of our students, a higher percentage of our third graders, and I'll look up to tell you what percentage that was last year, but we feared more students would not be meeting the Read to Succeed cut. However, the work went into working with principals, our reading coaches throughout the entire school year, and our assistant superintendents who maintain ongoing monitoring of students' literacy levels. They work with each team. Balanced literacy has continued to be an area of focus, but our intervention, there are monthly, bi-monthly meetings in which we're monitoring student progress. We ensure that all of our third graders who were identified in the fall as being below level on reading, we ensure that all of them were receiving intervention throughout the school year. So we did not wait until the summer for that to happen. We put our students in August, September, October. Those students received ongoing supports throughout the year, as well as what we hope to be as much of a quality face-to-face program of instruction as possible. Even in our virtual school setting, we had reading intervention, a program set up with students receiving one-on-one, as well as some computer-assisted support in reading. So there were a lot of efforts specifically around that, because we knew and we feared that if we did not maintain our students on their adequate reading level, we would not be able to regain. So 710 of all of our third graders being identified, that was something that I will say that we still would like it to be 0 because that's our ideal, but that number was not as high as we feared it might be.
What about those children, and I don't know how we would know, that never ever showed up to school because of reasons that the parents couldn't get them there, or they chose to keep them at home, or whatever the situation may have been, that got further behind because of the lack of parental guidance? I guess that's what you do. Are we seeing? I mean, did those children that didn't make the days, that didn't show up, are they repeating the third grade now, or how does that work?
Our summer reading camp addressed the needs of some of those who were not able to come. And having the small groups, there were some schools that had fewer than 10 students who were in their summer reading camp, and they had a dedicated teacher who worked with them all day. So we did work to address those needs for those who tested, and I think we had over 95% of our students to actually take the assessment, so this shows a fairly adequate number. They did come in to assess. We this year, though, have doubled down on our efforts in intervention, as Dr. Royster mentioned, with our CARES funds, to be sure that we have interventionists in place. We have targeted the students. These 710, are still receiving additional support during their fourth grade year. Whether they had a good cause exemption, whether they attended summer reading camp, they are still receiving support. But we've already identified our current third grade students, and we've doubled down with instruction, and we're giving professional development, a whole series of professional development with Susan Stevens, the State Department, on how we work to serve our students who are struggling readers.
I think, Dr. David, I didn't hear you mention it, but most of the conversation and the questions center around Read to Succeed. There was also another elementary summer program for ELA and math that had students participating in it that were not qualifiers, so to speak, for Read to Succeed. Isn't that correct?
Yes, there were. And so of the 710, as I mentioned, 323 participated. But if I go back to the first slide that shows the number of third graders, there were a total of 765 third grade students who were identified for ELA and or math and invited to attend. So we did get a lot of our third graders in.
And I believe your two numbers together would be over 1,000, all right?
They were, yes.
So kind of rule of thumb throughout the system, 5,400 a grade level. So if you looked at those two third grade numbers together, then you're talking about a fifth of the students that would be in that grade.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
I'm sure there'll be other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McDavid, for this. I'm a data person, so I love when I see the data on the summer program. What was the assessment tool that was used? I see that you have down here for the outcomes that you used MAP. What grade levels is MAP given now?
For summer reading camp, we only used MAP for the third grade students who were identified who had to attend based on Read to Succeed. So for summer reading this summer, only those 216 students who were attending, who were required to attend under legislation, were given MAP. Other students were not given MAP. We use our pre-test and our post-test around the priority standards that we identified. The state requires that we give those third grade students MAP, and that gives them an additional way to qualify for promotion if they meet a certain cut score. And of those, 126 of our students at the end of summer reading camp actually met the state cut score.
So during the school year, what grade levels are given MAP?
During the school year, we give MAP to our second grade students for one of the identifiers for GT. We did not give it last year, but traditionally we've given it to our fifth grade students as they get ready to enter sixth grade, and our eighth grade students as they get ready to enter ninth grade.
Okay.
But we did not give it last year.
Was Mastery Connect used at all?
Yes, Mastery Connect was used throughout the year. Last year we did a fall benchmark, a mid-year, and a spring benchmark.
Okay, and now I know that during the school year, a letter goes out to the parents telling about the child potentially failing. Is that still done in February, March?
Yes,
to alert
ma'am.
the parents?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, is it still that they have when you identify them, is them failing 2 or 3 content areas during the school year?
For reading third grade only, we send the letters out and the students are below
But
grade
for the
level in
others,
reading.
if they
But
are failing?
For the others, they are, I can let Mr. McCoy speak to that, but it's 2 subject areas.
Yeah, it's
The 2 subject areas?
Yes, ma'am. We focus on the ELA and math for the elementary. If you're talking grades K through 5, we're looking at the ELA and math when they make that decision primarily. Other subjects may come into play depending upon where the child's performing ELA and math as well. If they're on the verge of a decision, so to speak, we try to get the schools to send that out. Ideally, February, March across the board, not just for third grade.
Right.
But we need to give parents up front so that if we're offering remediation, the parents understand the severity of why they need to come to remediation.
Okay, is there a cost for the high school credit recovery classes? Do we charge for that? Or
We did not charge for that. We use CARES funds, so all students had free access to recover credits. Our teams at the high school, the principals, the instructional leadership teams, and guidance looked at students who were failing, targeted, had meetings, invited the students, and let them know what they needed to do even before they failed. So they had the opportunity of content recovery first, credit recovery second. There was no charge for any of it.
Good, great.
And
I'm
transportation
so
was
glad
free.
that our district is being proactive instead of reactive in doing the intervention and during the school year, so that the numbers were not higher. But thank you, Dr. McDavid. Thank you, Ms. Wood.
Thank you, Dr. McDavid, for your information. Lots of data to process. I just have I have a few questions, okay? It appears, if my math is correct, we had 8,700, well, almost 9,000 participate in summer remediation. Is that correct?
Those were summer remediation. That number does not include the accelerated, those who were doing initial credits. And their summer Read to Succeed was a number we pulled out separately, yes.
Okay, so that almost 9,000 does not include the Read to Succeed?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give me, I don't have a basis for comparison, I have no benefit of history, so can you give me an idea of what our normal summer remediation looks like?
Yes, in a traditional year, we would have hosted summer reading camp. We would have served at 5 schools, up to 5 different sites, and we would have served students from across the entire district. We, in the past, prior to 2019, and since I just, it's about 500 students that were 3rd grade only. The elementary did not have the benefit of a full remediation systemic support prior to this summer. Elementary promotion retention is not generally based on summer, so that was not the case. We only had summer Read to Succeed. However, there were some schools and their Title I projects who held summer remediation and supports. We had ESOL camps that were taking place at Cherrydale and a couple of other schools. We would have, we worked with Bell Excel one summer to do Title I summer school, so it varied, but at a very basic and at the very core, 3rd grade was always there, and other schools could offer supports to the extent they had a grant, Title I or otherwise, to help support the additional students. And most of our Title I schools did include a summer component. Middle school, traditionally our middle school students were only attending at one of our alternative school program sites, which was hosted at a school. So we'd pick a middle school in a region and our students would attend from all the other middle schools, and those were students who were in jeopardy of failing. They would have an assignment to go to, for example, Berea Middle School, and they would have courses or content they would need to complete. Certified teachers would be there. They worked predominantly online with, at that point, was Odysseyware. And if they passed it with teacher support, they could be promoted to the next grade. And if they did not pass, they were not promoted to the next grade. That would encompass usually fewer than 100 students at the middle grade levels. At the high school, we offered the credit recovery virtually as well. We have in the past done that through the Greenville County Virtual Schools program. Our students would be signed up from their high schools to participate in the virtual credit recovery component, and they would do that independently, but with support from a virtual teacher of record. And in the past, that would be under 1,000 students across all of our high schools. Under 1,000 enrollments. Some students had more than one, but we'd have under 1,000. With that, we would not have that face-to-face interaction, and we would have our students then either receive credit recovery or they would not. But that was traditionally the numbers and the setup for elementary, middle, and high school summer remediation or support.
Okay, so if I'm understanding what I just heard, it doesn't appear that there's really an apples to apples comparison from prior year, let's just say pre-COVID to COVID. Is that correct? Would that be an assessment? Correct.
That is correct.
Okay. Along that lines, and I probably just need clarification on this. So 710, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to the screen. 710 were identified under Read to Succeed. 231 are required. I'm struggling to understand the exemptions, because if they qualified, that's a lot that we aren't serving. And I read the categories, and I guess I'm a little confused.
We can go into more detail. The State Department and the legislation wrote in certain exemptions. For example, students with disabilities. A student with a reading disability, whether the student is in a self-contained classroom and has a lower cognitive level, lower than grade level cognitive level, or the students in a traditional classroom and receiving supports. There are certain disabilities that exempted students from being retained based on Read to Succeed. They're identified, but the Read to Succeed law for summer reading camp was, would they have to be retained? And so if a student had a reading disability, the legislation identified or just said, these are areas which we would not want to retain students who have been meeting their IEP goals, who have been making progress towards what their IEP levels or goals would be. We would not want to retain them based on a single test. For students with limited English proficiency, those who were new to our country, who are at a level 1, for example, who are not speaking English proficiently yet, or at a 2 and are still in the country for less than 2 years and not speaking the language proficiently, we do not want to retain them based on that one assessment. They too have goals towards which they're trying to gain language proficiency before they would be retained. The students who have been previously retained, some of our students have been retained 1 year already. They've already had intervention for, they said, up to 2 years. The student may not have an IEP or been identified as a student with a disability or 504, but recognizing that a student who has been retained before, say in 1st grade, being retained again in 3rd grade when you're already receiving that intervention was not something that the State Department or the legislation felt comfortable requiring that that student be retained. Would that student benefit from being in a summer program that offers acceleration and support? Yes. Did we invite them? Absolutely. But the Read to Succeed legislation just recognizes that it would not be fair to retain students based on one test when we already have either an IEP, a 504, we have their English proficiency scores. They've been retained already. We know what the data says about being retained multiple times in elementary school. And then we also had 87 students who demonstrated mastery through the portfolio. We didn't say up front, okay, you failed the test, you have to go to summer school or be retained. We actually looked at portfolios presented by schools. The schools were able to show us that in other areas and other ways of performing, students demonstrated mastery of grade level performance in reading.
Okay, thank you. So let me just restate this to make sure I understand. So this exemption status applies to retention.
Yes.
Not participation.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why we invited
That's the
them
point I needed
all
clarification
to
on.
And one thing Ms. Mosley, I'll say is we are required, we have to send them a letter saying they have a good cause exemption while inviting them, but some, of course, when they see they're exempted, don't always attend the summer school because they're exempted, but we are required to send the letter.
Okay, so what we're seeing here represented in these numbers are all 710 were invited, and we're
Yes.
seeing that only 229, is that right? Participated, 231
Yes.
participated?
Yes.
But that's because they chose to, but all these others that were in these exemption categories could have chosen to participate,
A
correct?
total of 323 of the 710 participated.
Okay, I'm sorry. Lots of numbers here.
Lots.
All right. All right, thank you for that clarification. That, I'm not sure that makes me feel better, but I understand the difference now. Thank you. I think this is my last question. Going to the high school, I understand historically speaking, we offer, I guess, credit recovery, maybe content as well, via a virtual platform. We've obviously seen that doesn't always work well for many students, and particularly my concern is that the students that fall into that category of needing to recover credit I'm not sure that's the best delivery channel for them always. So this summer, I was under the impression we were doing more in-person instruction. So again, lots of information here. Can you clarify exactly how the high school level received instruction? And then going forward, are we going to continue with the virtual platform for those types of remediation practices?
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
That does make
okay.
sense. So the high schools hosting their own sites had certified teachers of record. So to give you an example, J.O. Mann, they when we were at summer graduation, I asked Mr. Mayfield, how'd you get these numbers? He said, being able to have my teachers recruit their students and say, you failed this class, but I'm going to be here this summer to help you get through the credit recovery. They were able to have those individual conversations and the teachers to be present. Every high school had teachers of record for ELA, math, science, social studies, those core areas in which students needed to recover credits. So while they worked online, they did have a tool online because we needed to show proficiency. They actually had teachers of record who tutored students in the areas that they were deficit in. So they came alongside during, and they were there every day at the beginning with multiple students, and as students mastered the content, passed the credit recovery course an online course where those students got credit and they could continue on to their lives. The others continued and the teachers stayed with them face to face. So every school, every high school paid and had certified teachers on staff present during credit recovery for the hours of, I think it was 9 to 1. They had teachers on staff.
Okay. So is that a practice that it seems like that worked better than maybe years past, right? Is that what you're telling me? That because we always have teachers available pre-COVID to help with credit recovery?
We had teachers available, but we did not have transportation. Right. And those teachers were monitoring online content, but they were not in the same setting where they were live with students every day. No, ma'am. Whether or not we will be able to continue that this year with funding, I think the funding goes through September of 2024. I think that is something that as we get input from our leadership, that is a great consideration. We hope that with content recovery throughout the year, we will not have as many who will require credit recovery, but we do like that option.
Okay, last question. So kind of piggybacking on what I just asked, throughout all of this, I have tried to find lemonade out of lemon in some regard. And I'm hoping that we are keeping track of the things that maybe we've never done before, but we did as a result of the need this year that maybe worked really well, so that we can then, it might not be something we've tried in the past, but we found that it worked really well under this circumstance, and that maybe it would be something we would want to continue going forward, even in the hopes that we all do return to some semblance of normalcy one day. So, I mean, are we keeping track of those? I call them lessons learned, or
yes, we
the lemonade out of the lemon.
Yes, we are. Things we will keep from COVID.
Okay.
Is a running list in multiple departments, things that worked well, ways that we had to innovate that we found worked to serve our students more effectively or efficiently. Yes.
Okay. That's good to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good.
Charlotte, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you. I did have a couple of questions in regard to slide number 18 and also an observation. In ELA for the elementary students, you mentioned several times throughout the presentation about the level of literacy intervention, and I'm familiar with that. I felt like our students increasing 1.2 levels, I felt like that was significant, and very pleased with that. I think that's wonderful. But as I was looking on at the data in ELA for our middle school students, using a pre-test and post-test, they improved 12.5 points. You did mention that you have priority standards, and that was what was included on the pre-test. So on the post-test, students only improved 12.5 points in ELA. That was a little surprising to me as an educator. Can you speak to that?
Yes, to give that average shows a few things. The priority standards in ELA and math, especially at the middle level, are very complex. And so when we chose to target a priority standard that the students did poorly on, do know that we picked the standard that they did most poorly on to target for improvement. Now, while the student may have gotten more points, some students more than others. Still, that was an overall average. It is very difficult to quantify. We looked at it a number of different ways. Schools themselves are looking at how many standards they may have mastered. The students did a gain or master one or two more standards, but that is at the school level. So they begin this year knowing where the majority of our seventh graders need to work, or where the majority of our seventh graders, with our first benchmark using Master Connect, using the same standards overall, we know at our beginning of the year, we already know where our students need to focus in terms of our efforts and their efforts in mastering content. So the number, we chose to focus on the most difficult standards.
So you feel like that's the reflection of, I would say pretty much, even though there is some gain, as an educator in a pre-test and a post-test, I would anticipate more. So you feel like that's due to the complexity of the standard, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
I feel that that is definitely due to the complexity of the standard, and that we chose the most difficult ones to prioritize to work on.
And I'm looking at math now, and the elementary students gained 16.3 points from pre-test to post-test, kind of following the same guide. I would anticipate a little bit more than that, but then I look down at middle school, they increased an average of 6.9 points. And again, I hear you saying that you were looking at the most complex standards, and that probably speaks to some of the lack of progress there. So knowing that and realizing that, will there be any changes made in the future in regard to the pre-test, post-test, looking at the most complex standards? Will we rethink that in any way in hopes of making more progress?
We will do that. We first thought that we would pull our spring benchmark assessment, the last one they took before testing, to identify the standards, but there were seriously, too many standards to start from. So this was our way of honing in or closing in that gap, with our students having some worked on ELA in the middle school, some worked on math, many worked on both. But we may find ways to target more those students that are significantly behind. With the intervention at the middle levels, we have ELA interventionists and math interventionists, and understand that as the content builds upon itself, especially in math, some students may have been farther behind in their foundational supports than we were able to gain in the 4 weeks. But now that we have math interventionists in place who are looking at those bridge standards and providing students with not only the support in grade level, but also the preliminary, right now they've built units around or supports around those same priority standards in most cases, that students are getting both. We're hoping to close that gap more for more students, because we had not, up until this point, teachers were remediating in the classroom, but we were not doing specifically math intervention strategies around that bridge. But we learned from this that there's a need to do that, and there are certain standards that we need to spend more time developing, as they are foundational.
And Dr. Stiles, I do want to point out one thing I'm not sure we made clear in the beginning, particularly with the middle school, because they were only there about 4 hours, and they were doing math and ELA in that block, and so that even doesn't split necessarily to 2 and 2 hours, because there has to be breaks in there. So, when we looked at that data, you're really looking at somewhere between 16 and 21 hours per subject, about 3 weeks of school, really, of 3 weeks of continuous school. So, that's the other thing I don't know that we mentioned. It wasn't 4 hours of continuous instruction, and we had to split it for ELA and math in most cases. So given the 16 to 20 hours that the kids spent, that's some of the reason you'll see the lower numbers, because it really just wasn't a lot of time.
The other thing, and I know Dr. Stiles, you're aware of this because of your background, that everybody might not be aware or may not recall it. There are more standards in every grade than can be taught in a grade. And you don't always know, what standards the state will test each year. So you start with a losing proposition. There's X amount of teaching to be done, there's Y amount of time, but then they're going to measure on some number in X that you don't know which specifically those are. So that is an ongoing challenge, that we operate in a state design system that at its outset is flawed if you put more things in a year than can be taught in a year. And so that compounds dealing with this issue. It might also help for us to send, I think, Dr. McDavid, some examples of those standards, because we talked about in very abstract terms, these are more complex standards. It might be helpful for you all to see, what does that mean? When we're talking about a middle school math standard being one of the more complex ones, what does that mean? And perhaps what is it necessary for them to know before they can know that, before they can master that standard? That might be helpful. We'll be glad to send you all some example of that.
That would be great. And my final question in regard to the pre-test and the post-test is, how were those pre-tests and post-tests developed, and who developed those?
The academic specialist developed the pre-test and post-test. They designed the questions from the Mastery Connect Certica item bank, which have proven to be aligned to SC Ready. They pulled those standards and assigned them in trackers for students to take the assessment online, which is more like SC Ready online. So the academic specialist designed the pre and the post-test for the students.
Okay, thank you very much.
I want to say thank you again, Charlotte. You've heard that several times already. I do appreciate the hard work that a lot of educators did over the summer to try to mitigate, and all of last year. Looking at the summer remediation demographics, so that slide that kind of shows all the students. So it shows a breakdown. I guess I'm curious, how does this compare to the district as a whole? So if 53% of our students were male, what percentage of our students in the district are male? You know, because what I'm looking for is there a disproportionate representation when you compare any of these demographics to what we have in our district? So do you know the answer to that with these metrics?
I don't know the exact metrics, but I can pull those. I can tell you that pupils in poverty is definitely overrepresented. Here, it's more than our traditional population. With 20%, we have fewer than 20% English language learners in our district, with approximately 14,000 at this point. So yes, we do. I can get those numbers for you of the actual for the entire district so that you can see side by side which populations were identified. I won't say overrepresented, but
that's the point,
yes.
Right? That they were. So the damage was done to the whole, but there are groups that more damage resulted from.
We're definitely disproportionately affected. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just an important thing you don't see in these demographics that we need to be sure as we're looking into next year, and as we have to go back and look at Read to Succeed again, and that forced retention requirement,
Mm-hmm.
and even looking at the content credit recovery for high school students. To Ms. Mosley's point, we're in the third year of impact, and so there's this impact that I think we'll have to continue to use that money and hopefully not run out of the money before we're able to really help mitigate some of that. So I guess that's something, these students that were in the summer remediation, are we going to keep track, and are we providing interventions for them as they continue through the year?
Yes.
For each one of these students?
Yes. So we included in Power School a note of those who were in academic remediation last year, those who were in academic remediation who went to summer remediation, and so now we are continuing to identify the kids who will be supported this year. That's still in, so that even if a student transfers schools, a school will note that that student was in academic remediation or summer. We want to provide a continuum of support based on where they are now, but understanding what has been in place so we don't lose the effort. Yes.
So then in looking at these numbers too, percentage of representation virtual, who were all virtual versus who were in person last year. Did you guys look at that breakdown to see, you know, to the point about how do we do in our virtual school compared to the in-person? What's the representation of these students that were all virtual last year?
I will get that data for you. We do have the test data broken down in virtual and non-virtual, and Mr. McCoy is going to be sharing that. But I will add to the report that I'll give you overall demographics and those who are virtual and non-virtual.
So when you get into Read to Succeed, what was that 2018 number again?
In 2018, 321.
So we more than doubled the number of students that were identified. And exemptions versus not, what did that look like in previous years?
I have to go back to that presentation, but if I recall correctly, about half of them had exemptions. But we served over 500 in the summer reading camps, but I can get those numbers for you as well.
Another just clarification on the initial credit for high school. When we get to high school credits, and we're looking at we're saying initial credit, but just to clarify, those are, well, how many of those are failed classes? Because you see initial credit and you don't really think about, oh, that's an initial credit, but it's likely that those are failed classes that the student chose to retake for full credit as a full class so that they could get a GPA, so they can mitigate the impact of their GPA. Am I right about that or not?
The majority of the students who participate with the Greenville County Virtual Program are accelerating their they're trying to accelerate. We have 8th, 9th graders who are trying to take an additional course in the summer so that they can get ahead. So they are not repeaters. Most of our students who have failed a course are taking credit recovery. Those who are taking initial credit, the majority of them are not repeaters.
So a phenomenon we used to have several years ago were, for instance, a student takes an Algebra 1 in 8th grade and they get a C or they get a B or they get they don't get an A. And so their family chooses for that student to retake the class for initial credit through virtual school to try to get that A instead of the B. So how much, does that still?
Yeah, there's still some of that. A lot of it we've experienced over the years. It's more common for them. There's some percentage that choose to do that. It's more common for them to retake that class in brick and mortar than it is virtual. Virtual can be a little bit of an unknown, particularly for middle school parents, because sometimes their first class to take virtually. So when they're retaking like the algebra because they want an A or a B or whatever it happens to be, a higher grade, a lot of times they're retaking that, excuse me, in brick and mortar in the 9th grade. But there's some virtual too.
So.
But I can get the number for you if you want to see of the 647. Were any of those repeating the same course? We can.
Well, I guess that's just because again, I'm thinking about this as remediation, but that's not that represents over 2,000 credits that you're saying is acceleration, not students who are trying to recover and remediate from a loss.
Right.
So that could be a bright spot if it's true that we still have students who are still on that path to accelerate through what they're doing. So, okay, and with regard to so the labs that were set up in high school, I imagine they're very similar to what our high schools have had for a few years. And I won't necessarily give Mr. Reimer credit. I'm not sure he was the first one to do it in a high school at Malden, but it's where you have that lab actively during the school year that students move into when they begin to tail a class and fall behind and do content credit recovery. And so that's at a 15-to-1 ratio is what we said, which I think's awesome. That I think that's the right size. So I think principals were using flex money or other allocations to provide that during the school year. Am I right about that?
The current year, and Mr. McCoy can speak specifically to the allocations, we have allocations for academic support in the high school level.
So the current, last 2 years, we've put additional ones in place for them with the CARES money. That's part of the aids that we put in place for that during the day remediation for credit or content recovery. Previously, there's some schools, there's several pots of money they can use. They can use different ATSI. I think they can use ATSI money for that, which is the state. Some state money that they can use for that, or some do choose, to use flex money for that, or local funds. Sometimes if they choose to bring in somebody hourly to work a few hours a day with the kids in that lab. So they put together a hodgepodge of ways they do it.
Have they done that in the summer in the past, or has it just been during the school year? This past year?
Yeah, we've done it every summer as well. We do, as Dr. McDavid said, although it wasn't as much as Ms. Mosley pointed out, in the summertime, we have the labs and people available for them to come to us if they need help. A lot of kids choose not to take advantage of that or don't need it. Some kids just don't simply need it, or they don't have the transportation sometimes to get there. So we do support them virtually from home. A lot of kids, because of jobs in the summertime, though, anecdotally, they're working in the summer. So a lot of times when you look at when they're online at night doing that work. So we don't have as much coming in because of jobs in the summertime to do the credit recovery with us. They choose to do it at home.
But that's one intervention that we have had and we've been able to fund that we've just had to ramp up more of what we're doing.
Yes, and they also on occasion will get permission to exchange a portion of an FTE to do that as well.
Okay. In addition to having that flex allocation to do that, they could also.
They can request the exchange in FTE because it's pulling students, obviously it's pulling students off their master schedule to be assigned in there to do that work so they can utilize if it's for a lab person, it's a fraction of a FTE because they're not equal to a full-time teacher.
Yeah, and the only time that they still sometimes end up with extra students if it's a student who was on early dismissal that ends up having to come back off of early dismissal, but yeah, okay. Okay, well, I think certainly all the lessons we've learned, how do we improve virtual? How do we leverage the remediation opportunities we can offer during the school day, during the school year, are hopefully key takeaways that we can figure out how to have included in our budget beyond the COVID funds running out. So thank you for all that.
Thank you.
You'll get those other numbers.
Thank you. I certainly will.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bush.
On credit recovery, why are we using the P and NP for the grade?
The state uniform grading policy tells us to use the P for pass and NP for not pass. The student has, if a student took Algebra 1 and failed it, they've already earned what represents their grade weight for that course, so they would get a lower GPA. When they do credit recovery, it shows up as Algebra 1 CR, which is credit recovery. They get a P or an NP, and that tells us that they get 1.0 credit for having taken that math, but it does not impact their GPA. And that is dictated through the state uniform grading policy. That's why we follow that.
If I got a F in my GPA, and then if I was giving letter grades, I got an A, wouldn't that raise my GPA?
And the state uniform grading policy seeks to make that more uniform. What you do in credit recovery is not the entire course. What you do in credit recovery is you take a pre-assessment, and of the 10 units, you may have to repeat in full 3 of them. With that, you can get a P or an NP, but to give you a numerical grade that says you've earned now a full numerical grade of an A for a full credit, that would not be uniform, it would not be consistent. So the credit recovery is designed not to inflate the GPA, because if we did that, a student who failed the course the first time still has the opportunity to retake the whole course. If they retake the whole course and get an A, then that replaces that F in their GPA. You can retake the whole course again and get the A. But if you do credit recovery, it does not impact your GPA. It would not be fair to all the other students.
How do you justify that?
The state uniform grading policy says that if I took it the first time, so if I took the course and the first time I took the course, I got a 95, But Mr. McCoy took it and he got a 55. He got an F. So we're competing for scholarships on the uniform grading scale. If he then goes back and repeats or recovers just 3 little units out of the 10 and gets an A on those 3 little units, if he then gets the same grade weight that I get, then that's not fair to me. What that says is he's recovered enough to get credit for that towards graduation requiremements, so it counts towards him having that course to graduate, but it does not increase his GPA. If he wants to compete with me for the ranking, he needs to take that whole course all over again, the entire course, and earn the same grade that I did.
He couldn't do that this past year, could he?
He can, any year, according to uniform grading.
In summer school.
In summer school,
Can you go to summer school and get a full?
you can, you can. South Carolina Virtual.
But you couldn't this one.
You could have gotten initial credit through South Carolina Virtual, who offers, you would have to enroll in it. He would know that he failed that class. He would know, his parents would know that he needs to retake it. He could have taken that entire course through the South Carolina Virtual program, applied for it, and tried to get a better GPA.
How does that compare with getting the P or the NP?
The credit recovery means that he took a pretest and he only had to redo or retake or show mastery for the small component of the course that he didn't do well in.
What if he didn't do well in most of the course?
If he didn't do well in most of the course, then the parent may wish to have him retake the whole course, because when he goes to geometry or algebra 2, he's going to need to master more content if he didn't do well in most of it. If in credit recovery it determines that he did not master all of it, he would have repeated the activities to practice all of the standards, which takes a bit longer. So some students can do credit recovery in a short period of time. Some students can do credit recovery and it takes longer because they have more content to master. But it's only, the uniform grading policy just points out that credit recovery gives you credit for having taken the course towards graduation, but the grade itself does not change, and the only way they could do that was do a P or an NP.
I take credit recovery for Algebra 1, and then I get the P when I go to Algebra 2. How do I know that I have accumulated what I need to do for Algebra 1 to go to Algebra 2? It looks like maybe you're watering it down.
If you entered our credit recovery today for Algebra 1, you would take a pretest that covered all of the major units that were essential for you to master and be ready for the next level. If you had one attempt, you take that test, the ones that you master, you don't have to retake or redo. The ones that you do not master, you need to have some additional activities and remediation and tutoring. That is where the teacher of record comes in. Everyone who has credit recovery has a teacher of record. That is where the teacher of record can sit with you and say, Mr. Sudeth, you really need to work on this area of Algebra 1. So in addition to you trying to do these activities and watching the videos, I'm going to have to work with you. And I'll give you some additional instruction on the areas that you would not, so that by the time you finish all of your credit recovery, you should have had what you got in the face-to-face for 180 days or 90 days, and you should have support to just fill in the gap for you on the things you didn't do well on.
If I did not do well, then you would be better advised to tell me I need to go and repeat the course. Because if I failed this Algebra 1 and I did the catch-up on it, and it turned out I had 10 areas and I failed 9 of them, when I go back, I can't, if I do those, then I don't see that's really helping me with Algebra 2.
True.
And if I'm looking for a GPA, and GPAs are really important to a lot of students because it tells where I'm going to be able to get in this college or not, and where am I going to be able to get a scholarship or not.
Yes.
But yet, if I'm going for credit recovery, that doesn't really help me at all. So do we tell our students, no, if you wanted to get a better GPA, what you need to do, you need to repeat the course?
it's an individual conversation because some students aren't competing for GPA necessarily. Some students are really working to graduate in a timely fashion. Others are, and they may choose to retake the course, but those are individual conversations with students based on their graduation plans.
I just wonder what we're telling those students in that regard when we say, this is what you can do or you can't do.
Mr. Soto, do you have further questions? I'm just going to extend the time if you have questions.
No, ma'am, I still think it's watered down. That's all, thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions. That was for information only. Thank you so much, Dr. McKenzie. And we will move on to 4.03, preparation for and participation in youth and informative programs.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Mrs. Goodwin-Cowell had inquired about this at the very end of last year, and so this presentation is in response to her inquiry. And at this time, I'll turn that over to Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. So as Dr. Royster said, just an overview of the current program, the structure, process. I don't think we've done this in a little bit. Well, it's been a couple of years actually. How students briefly come at a high level or identify for the program, and then some of the things we are doing to continue to hopefully increase that enrollment in the Challenge GT program in our district. See, I have a little problem with mine. Let's do it here. So the Challenge is the program overview. I think most people know how it's structured in our schools, but in elementary school, that is a pull-out program. I'll talk about virtual in a minute. We're doing something a little bit different in virtual as a pilot, something we were getting ready to start hopefully pre-COVID, but then didn't have a chance to do that. But virtual's given us an opportunity to do some piloting. So currently in our brick and mortar across the board in elementary school, we are looking at a pull-out program for grades 3 and 4 and 5 as well. And you can see the minute breakdown there. Those are state requirements as far as the minutes that are required in order to get the funding that you have to meet and get in GT programs to get that funding for those students. Students in middle school are served in the GT English 6, 7, or 8, or English 1 honors. GT 8 doesn't necessarily exist. It's English 1 honors. So it's that high school credit course they're earning credit for at that level. And then in high school, students are served in honors, English, and math. And I will also say, obviously, a lot of our students in 10th grade, as they progress up, are going to go into those AP courses and also those dual credit courses as well. Obviously, not everybody who takes AP and dual credit is identified as gifted students. So there's a lot of students by the time they get that point are taking those higher level courses and aren't necessarily identified as GT. The Charlestown Center, that, as you know, is a little bit different. Really in Greenville, it's kind of a unique program. There's not a lot of those around the country as far as a subset. We still use the same identification criteria as state to identify all kids GT. And then there's additional set of criteria for the Sterling, the CTC Center. But again, that's kind of unique around the country. Not a lot of those programs exist. So we're a little unique that way. We have a capacity up to 90 students in grades 3 through 8. They are immersed, so that is a immersive program. It's not a pull-out like it is in the traditional middle schools. It is a pull-out. It is a full immersive program, so they are getting the same curriculum, so to speak, but a much higher level, and it's going much deeper. In some cases, depending upon the students, you may, yes, occasionally have a child, several children each year. You may have some children take calculus in 6th grade. So it is serving those students. We try to adapt to their needs as much as possible. Even though most of our students may not take calculus in 6th grade, we do have those students who qualify and are able to do that. Students do have to meet the state criteria, as I mentioned first. And then admittance into the CTC is a subset of that state identified students, and we'll talk about those. And the selection process does mirror the state design selection process, but obviously it's more rigorous. There's a certain level of percentile that we're going to teach just based on the content that we're doing at the CTC and what level of depth we're going in CTC. So qualifying for the gifted program, there are 3 dimensions that we identify through GT, aptitude, achievement, and performance. Students must have at least one qualifying item in 2 different dimensions. Certainly some students qualify in multiple of those, but they do have to have one qualifying item in 2 different dimensions, and this is the state requirements. These are not local requirements, these are state requirements. The only exception there you can see at the bottom is if the student's composite aptitude is in the 96th percentile or greater. In that case, they don't have to have, no other scores will be required for that qualification. Now, this is a higher level, and if we want any more detail on this, we certainly can send this to you. This is a higher level of qualifying for the GT program. There's a whole almost 2 pages worth of stuff from the state as far as students and scores and how they qualify. These certain scores do vary year to year from cut scores. It does depend on the year. For example, how students identify for on standardized tests, for example, that does vary year to year what that cut score is for identification. But you can see again, each in dimension A, B, and C, those 3 things that tie to those 3 bullets there I mentioned in the previous slide. There's just a little bit more detail about what does that actually look like in there. And so you can see this happens throughout the various years. Again, this is state criteria we use in dimension A just as a point of reference. We use COGAT in that dimension A, and we use MAP and ITBS in that dimension B. That's one of the reasons we have MAP testing for all of our 2nd grade. That's a required 2nd grade test that we do with all of our students for that possible qualification. And then the CTC criteria from that, again, we start with that state criteria, we narrow it down to CTC criteria. Students who score on a nationally normed aptitude test at the 98th or 99th age or grade percentile, and score on a nationally normed achievement test between the 96th and 99th percentile in the math and the reading. Those are the 2 categories that we serve in GT, and also the artistically GT. I didn't have that in here specifically, but we do identify students as artistically GT as well, gifted and talented too. So one of the things that we have been able to do, I think it was one of Ms. Caldwell's questions about how do we look at students that maybe in schools that we don't have a lot of GT students traditionally in them. And so one of the things that I believe is 3 years now we're going into, we applied for and received a Jacob Javits grant for GT. That's specifically for gifted and talented education. And then that grant, those funds are used to place students on a trial basis in schools that have low GT enrollments. And I'll give you that list here. Well, you can see it down there at the bottom, actually, the last bullet there. Those are the schools that are named based on the data we pulled that had the lowest GT enrollments. So there is, in some cases, you'll recognize some of those are Title I schools, and then some of them are not Title I schools. So it's not only just Title I schools, it can be any school that might have a lower GT enrollment that we need to look at how do we increase that enrollment for the students. And so that grant just awards extra supplies, materials for students, including those character education materials. If you're familiar with our GT program, Character Ed is a big piece that's built into that, as well as that math and ELA piece as well. And so again, you can see the schools that are listed there. And then the demographic breakdown of students, I'm not going to go through all those. You can see where we stand. The 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I'll just point out, those are the ones that are identified in Power School as GT. And again, you'll have many more students than that. Does not mean those are the only students taking advanced level classes. There's a lot of other students taking them. They just may not be identified as GT for whatever reasons on that. The ethnic breakdown, you can see the ethnicity breakdown, you can see there. We do not have we originally had the state data on there for comparison purposes. However, the state apparently, after they contacted us, they did not have all the districts reporting at this time. And so we pulled that back because it's not accurate at this time. So they are working on finishing that reporting from this last year as far as the breakdown by gender, breakdown by ethnicity, all the things, the way they break down GT. We do not have that data right now from the state. The national data, and I think we sent that to you as a board when the first question came up maybe 6 or 8 months ago. The national GT data, if you'll notice on there, was back from 2014. So not a great comparison. It's about 7 years old, which is old for data. However, the Dr. McCreary's office, and he's in here, as well as our third-party researcher we reach out to sometimes, that is the most current data we have. Was back from 2014. So again, not really a comparison. However, back in 2014, and again, compared to state data as of last year, on the ethnicity side, we were still ahead of the state in that. And you can look at that national data we sent you, although again, there's not a really comparative purposes. 7 years is a long time to compare data on that. And then you can see again the male-female. The male-female breaks fairly even with our district. Our district has more males and females, so we're slightly off by 1% or 2 on there as far as participation in the GT program. And so then the future of what that looks like, a couple of things that we're doing on how to increase not just participation in those schools that we talked about as part of the Javits grant, but how do we increase participation in all students? How do we make sure we're identifying students in the program that would be have GT indicators, but maybe are not qualifying for GT. And so we was 2000, I think it was 18 or 19, Charlotte, right before COVID. We had a committee together. We reinvested in looking at. We attended the National GT conference to catch up on kind of latest trends in GT, to kind of put a plan together for the future. How do we continue to identify students, make sure we're not missing people missing students in the identification process? And so we are piloting a self-contained model in virtual program right now. So in other words, the third graders, because of the way the numbers broke, and the fourth graders, the way the numbers broke into virtual, those are self-contained gifted classes. So in other words, that teacher is teaching a group of gifted and talented identified students all day. So she is also responsible, or he is responsible for those test scores. As you know, with the current program in a brick and mortar, they go out to GT. But then the math scores, the ELA scores are actually maintained by the teacher of the third grade classroom, not from the GT teacher. So that's a little pilot we're doing. Again, that varies around the country how people do it. Some do pull out, some do self-contained, some do after school, before school. There's all kinds of models they use. We are continuing that grant. We have a few more years left on that grant to identify our at-risk students for GT as well, to hopefully increase those numbers. And then with this transition from Dr. Andrews to Dr. Stevens, who I think is also in here somewhere, that we are looking at how do we provide intentional experiences in our curriculum in 4K, 5K, first grade specifically, for those students and at risk, but everybody, ultimately, that curriculum would be across the district, but for our at-risk students where it would benefit more for those students to be identified. We know a lot of the identification, particularly in second grade of GT, has to do with the child's experiences. For those of us who did, something as simple as Lincoln Logs, or some sort of, I don't know if that exists anymore, but whatever the blocks are today that they play with, that's something that they'll tell you is spatial reasoning. That's some of the skills you're getting by doing that and playing that way that can ultimately help identify criteria, or you build criteria, which is ultimately was tested on those tests. And so some of those things that we need to build in for the at-risk students who may not have the resources necessarily, they're not getting that experiences, not because they're any less gifted than somebody else, they just didn't have the experiences that the same students in maybe a different family or household did have. So what Dr. Stevens is working on is actually identifying those key things of students who have at-risk families who may not have experience with, and building those into our curriculum. As you know, K4 and K5 particularly is what we call constructive play. So how do we make that even more constructive and meaningful? So make sure we build those experiences into our constructive play in kindergarten and K4 and K5, so that the kids are getting more experiences with those things that hopefully will help them be more identified on those some of those tests that they're given for the GT identification. So we are looking at that targeted implementation. Dr. Stevens is working through that now this year. Got a little behind with COVID, but we're planning to roll that out this year. Planning on rolling it out next year. She's finishing up some of those identifications, and then we'll build that into the curriculum in our K4, K5, do some training with our teachers specifically in those grade levels. And then hopefully implement that in 22-23 next school year. Obviously, we won't see the impact of that probably for a few years till those kids get up to second grade and actually start taking those assessments. And then also Sterling School is piloting K-2 identification and service through the Javits grants as well. That's a new area for us. Our state identifies in second grade. There are many other districts around the country and states around the country that actually identify in kindergarten, or begin to identify in kindergarten. So we're not identifying in kindergarten, second grade, or kindergarten, first grade rather, but we are again looking at what are some key indicators of students who show potential of GT that we can maybe immerse with those students and actually build upon that and do a little bit more work with them. And hopefully that will be in the way of through a curriculum that we would be putting out. We're embedding into the current curriculum. We'll still be teaching the same curriculum, still standards in kindergarten, first grade. It's just making those activities a little bit more intentional to build those skills that that would be tested through the GT piece. And I believe that was the last slide there.
Thank you, Jeff, for this information. And you answered some of the questions that I had asked back in May. I wanted to know, what year are we in this grant?
I believe this is the third year. Do you remember, Dr. McDavid? Fourth year? Fourth year of the grant.
Okay, and reading up here, it says the funds were to be used to trial, place students at schools with low GT enrollments. Why is it that Sterling School was chosen as a pilot school? So if that's a gifted and talented school.
Well, remember the GT piece of that's only 3rd through 8th grade. That's that's only part of the school. So when you look at the gifted program being served, they are one of the lower ones, a number of kids going into that program as well. So they still were at the bottom of that list.
But it said that school was chosen, and I know that it was some other schools that had lower enrollment than the Sterling School. And if Sterling School is supposed to be a gifted and talented school, why was it in this grant phase?
So there's two components of Sterling. CTC is the CTC side, the gifted side of Sterling.
Right.
But when you stack that data as far as identification goes, Sterling School, so for the population of true Sterling School K through 5, take the gifted part out, because the gifted part of CTC comes from all over the district. When you take out the true K-5 kids of Sterling who are zoned for Sterling and attend Sterling, they did rank at the bottom of that list as far as identification of GT.
Okay, what is the when is the map given to identify the GT? Is that the first part of the year, the latter part of the year? When is map
It's actually
given?
winter administration.
Winter.
It'd be it's called right before Christmas.
I'm glad to see that you said that y'all would be prepping K through 2. That was one of my main concerns, was that if we give them those experiences, then maybe we'll see more of our kids in the GT program. I think that was it, but I'm gonna call you about those questions about Sterling School. That's all, Ms. Bush.
Thank you. So I guess you included in the demographic breakdown, you included the ethnicity and gender, but not poverty, low income.
Yeah, so we have that on there. The poverty tricky part there is, and we can put it back on, but with the CEP schools, a lot of those would be coming up as 100% poverty. You know, it throws it off a little bit because of the way we do the free reduced lunch with is a CEP certified? I can't remember the initials. CEP, is that right? Thank you.
Community eligibility certification. So everybody's 100%.
Correct. So it wasn't real accurate, and so we kind of took it off because it wasn't.
You don't have a good way to look at that.
Not really as a whole. Now, individually by school, we do look at that, because I can pull individual children and tell if they're in poverty or not.
I don't think you don't get a summary report using PIP, which is the other index measure. You know, we got free reduced lunch, we got pupils in poverty, which basically the pupils in poverty is any family receiving any kind of assistance from this long list of things. And our index of pupils in poverty is like 58, 59% district-wide. Whereas the last time we did free and reduced, where it wasn't 100% eligibility, we were right at 50%. But if they don't send the reports back broken out by PIP, so the only way to do it is what Jeff's talking about. You can look at an individual student to see their status and see how they scored.
You'd almost have to have each school, you'd have to do that at a school level evaluation first and then roll that up.
By student, correct.
Which to me would be worth, if we're looking at what strategies do we need to ensure that students have the experiences they need identified, that's the key, then it's important to know that, you know, because what that looks like, it could be about both things, right? So Fort Shoals is a really different demographic there, but they don't have, well, I haven't seen numbers lately, but they don't have numbers that qualify at the same level for gifted and talented, and certainly not for CTC. So.
Right. And we can pull that individually from a child and get that profile, if you will. We try to pull, when we pull this data, we try to get it directly out of the state gift system, just so it's as accurate as possible. So when we asked for the poverty data, what came back was 100% across the board from the state.
So the students that were identified in second grade for GT, we don't start GT services till third grade. So what's the 693 that are identified as gifted and talented there?
So those would have been when we pulled these numbers. These would have been the ones initially when we pulled these out of the system that were initially identified. And those
identified, not for not getting services.
Correct.
Have they been identified? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And then the high school again. Explain that to me. Is that ones that are already coded in Power School as gifted and talented because they were in a gifted and talented program and
most
identified?
of them, yes.
Okay. Okay. So the pilot program at Sterling, I guess when we toured there last year, maybe, I talked to them a little bit about that. What I understood they were trying to do is use some alternative assessments like the Nagley area. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Because you can use that to identify young children and use that in their population of Sterling School students. And then if you can identify that a student has an aptitude, has the higher aptitude, then you can work with those students in particular to provide those additional services.
Correct, before second.
Right, so is the intent with this program as a whole to similarly identify early and provide those experiences?
Yes.
Because we would like to, all of our children need these experiences, right?
Correct.
They all need that sort of engagement, but I think the point of understanding that kids in poverty and African-American students, and I haven't seen the numbers on Hispanic, but there are students who are underrepresented that are going to need a certain intervention if we're going to identify them as gifted. And so what I would advocate for is, whereas we tend to say, well, if it's good for this group, then let's do it for everyone, but then that's really hard to get that intensive targeted work that you might need. So I guess in this whole body of work, which approach are we taking? Are we looking at identifying those students that are at risk or that don't come from the backgrounds that are going to allow them those opportunities, and then targeting them for intensive services? Or are we looking, what are we looking at?
So it's a little bit of both. When the Javits grant was put in place, we had not yet started reevaluating our GT program. And so what's written in the Javits grant, with what you mentioned with the K-2, is again, it's a pilot there, and we won't really know until the end of next year, really, what that ultimately looks like as far as was that successful identification. And by then we will have some students, we'll be able to look at the numbers and say were more kids identified as a result or qualified as a result of starting earlier. And so certainly we can take some of those principles that they do and carry those across the board to target it more specifically. We also know, just some of the research we did at the GT National Conference and what some other districts were doing, we also know that, to your point, those practices, spatial reasoning, for example, the more of that we can build into the constructive play in K4 and K5, even in first grade, only benefits students further in their career, particularly in math. It may not identify them for GT ultimately. They may not have that disposition, but it will actually help them long-term in math because of the spatial reasoning required in math. So ideally, down the road, we would have to train, to your point, if we identify those through the test and then try to hone in on, okay, these kids we believe do have the potential, they have the background, or we can give them the background to, again, pass those tests in second grade to be identified GT. Yes, we can work with them. We just have to train teachers on how to then target that specifically to do that. And that's part of what we're looking at out of the Javits grant with the K-2 pilot.
And then the self-contained model in the virtual program. I know that our philosophy at some point many years ago was very intentional in saying we need to mix all students, all academic levels in every class, so that, whatever the reasoning was at that time, you know, so that, I don't know, there's no gap. But some of the research since then has indicated that to ask a teacher to teach students who are at the 10th percentile and the 98th percentile creates a lot of burden for that teacher to figure out how to deliver that content. So is the idea of this could we look at that self-contained model as a way to kind of give us inform us in, should we be looking at some different groupings for how we put students in a classroom, so that a teacher's maybe teaching from the 10th to the 40th and maybe from the 30th to the 70th? And
so, yeah, at least for the GT side of it, yes, we were in the process with the whole point of that committee that we took and was involved a couple principals that we took a couple years ago to that conference, was really to come back with what would be some recommendations or some pilots that we might want to do. And fortunately for us in virtual, it just happened to work out because of the numbers that we really need to find an innovative solution to serve the students in virtual. And so that's why we created that model. A hybrid of that model, though, could be, to your point about, there is some concern still about having, you know, acclimation into the whole class, if you will, as well. So one of the other districts do a lot of times is those kids go out for math each day to a GT teacher with those strategies trained, and they're responsible for those grades, and they go back to the gen ed classroom teacher. And so that's kind of a hybrid of both, where you don't have a full self-contained, but yet that teacher is still responsible for, that GT teacher would still be responsible for those grades and those, you know, some of the accountability there. And it also gives you a little bit more ownership to a degree. And really, we identified that starting looking backwards at our problem in identifying some math deficits. Like why do a lot of our kids, sometimes identified as GT in elementary and even some in middle school, not go into higher level math classes? And so we kind of work backwards from that to say we probably need to go a little deeper into the math in elementary school, a depth, not a grade level. You have to be teaching 4th grade math in 3rd grade, but depth of concept is what we're seeing as a deficit. And so this was a way to kind of could bridge those two things together to say maybe we can accomplish both by being a little bit more intentional in our GT programming, and working with districts like Wake County, who's had some success in that, and some others around the country who have had success.
I like that we're being really intentional about looking at the program with a fresh set of eyes and figuring out, should we be delivering services differently and understanding what is the benefit, because for many years you didn't really know what the benefit was, and then you had some students who would decide, I don't want to go do pull-out because I'm missing out on good content in the classroom. So that, and I'm excited that we're trying to find ways to identify students in K2 that really have the aptitude, they just haven't had the experiences. So.
And that's a good point, Ms. Wells. I'm glad you said that. I neglected to say that. One of the issues that some of the parents do have, there's a lot of kids that are gifted in math but not ELA. There's a lot of kids that are gifted in ELA and not math. And when they're not in the current pull-out program, some parents do have concern. You know, my child struggles in ELA, and they're going out this time for the gifted, but they're missing this portion of this. So, you know, to that point, that was also one of the problems we were trying to solve, is how do we create a model where students aren't feeling like if they go into this program, they're going to be missing something here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bush.
Any other questions? Other questions? I did want to ask on the grant.
Yes.
This is the 4th year of that grant?
Yes, ma'am.
How much does that grant for?
Oh, do you remember Dr. McDavid? I don't remember the doc. Well, we can send it to you, Ms. Bush. I don't remember. I don't remember the full.
I was just wondering, is that something that we would, that is able to reapply for, or is that okay?
Yeah, we can reapply. It's a federal, so we can reapply for it again, and certainly can look at the results of that and feel what we need to adjust.